Good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee, which is one of 3 area-based planning committees of Dorset Council. Our area of remit covers the previous Purbeck District Council and most of the previous East Dorset District Council areas. For the benefit of the public, I am Councillor Tony Coombs, Chairman of this Area Planning Committee. Just to make it easy for people, I'm just going to do a run through of the officers that will be supporting us today. I have Tony Bird, Planning Case Officer, Liz Adams, Planning Team Leader East, Ellie Lee, Planning Case Officer, Kevin Riley, Planning Case Officer, Peter Waters, Planning Case Officer, Andrew Collins, Principal Team Leader North, Kim Cow, Principal Planning Officer, who will be reading out some of the public representations, Chelsea Gollage, Technical Support Officer, who will also be reading out public representations, Colin Graham from Highways, Claire Marshall from Highways, David Northover, Committee Support Officer, and Phil Crowther, Senior Solicitor. I would also like to thank the officers behind the scenes who are making today's virtual meeting possible. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Council has had to put in place measures to enable the Council's decision-making processes to continue whilst keeping safe members of the public, councillors and council staff in accordance with the government's guidance on social distancing by applying new regulations for holding committee meetings from remote locations. This meeting is being live streamed to the public and a copy of the recording of the meeting will be available on the website afterwards. Public participation will take the form of written statements as opposed to public speaking to the committee. We will be following the agenda as set out in the document pack. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. David Northover, have we received any apologies for absence?
Chairman, yes, one apology for absence from Councillor Bill Trite. Councillor John Worth has informed me that he will be attending the morning session but has other caring commitments to attend to this afternoon.
That's fine. I'm about to do a roll call to identify those members present this morning, and I will do another roll call when we resume after the lunch break. So, for this morning's session, Shane Bartlett, Vice Chairman.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Alex Brenton.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Cherry Brooks.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Robin Cook.
Present, Madam Chairman.
Mike Dyer.
Present, Chair.
Beryl Izzard.
Present, Chairman.
Barry Gorringe.
Present, Chairman.
David Morgan.
Present, Chairman.
David Took.
Present, Chairman.
And John Worth.
Present, Chairman.
Morning to you all. So, members, do I have any declarations of pecuniary or other conflict of interest, bias or predetermination?
Chairman, please. It's Cherry Brooks.
Yep, Cherry.
I was on the previous Purbeck District Council committee that voted against the planning permission, so the principle for this. But obviously now that the planning permission has been granted by appeal and we are only looking at reserved matters, then I'm approaching that with a completely different view and an open mind.
Thank you very much. Are there any other declarations of interest?
Yes, Beryl Izzard. I similar to Councillor Cherry Brooks. I'm not sure that I was on the planning at the Purbeck District Council for this particular one, but I know exactly the same thing. I have been contacted by various people from Langton Travers and I've kept an open mind about things. I did make a site visit a couple of days ago, as Bill Trite did too. I am very open mind about it all at the moment.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving down the agenda. Minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of May. Are members happy to approve them as a true record?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I think the easiest thing is Does anybody disagree? Fantastic. So as soon as I'm able to physically go and sign them, I will. Moving on now, public participation. Members of the public have been invited to submit written representations which are limited to 450 words. Members of Dorset Council who are not members of the committee and who wish to address the committee will be allowed to speak to an application. All requests have to have been registered with Democratic Services by 8:30 AM on Monday the 1st of June. David Northover, are there any representations from the public that do not relate to matters on the agenda today?
No representations received, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to the schedule of planning applications, and we have 6 applications on the agenda before us today. Have there been any requests for deferrals or withdrawals, please?
Good morning, members. Kim Cowell. There is a request for the Upton Oil Company application, agenda item number 7, to be deferred. This is at your officer's request, and I'll set out the reasons. During the current COVID-19 restrictions in relation to public meetings, members of the public wishing to address the committee are invited to submit up to 450 words by 8:30 AM, 2 working days before the committee. This application generated a significant number of third-party representations with no email addresses supplied. 346 letters were sent out first class last Wednesday, inviting written submissions. It has, however, been drawn to officers' attention that a reduced postal service is operating in the Upton area with no Saturday deliveries. The council's letters were therefore not delivered until after the cut-off period. Members of the public were consequently unable to register written comments on this application within the prescribed timeframe. Given the number, and for these very particular reasons, it is your officer view that application 6/2019-0443 should be deferred from this committee in order to allow written representations to be read at committee. Representations have, however, been received in time for all other agenda items. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. That is very clear, the very particular reasons for this one application. So we will defer that one to the next meeting. So moving on, background information relating to the applications before us today has been available for inspections by members prior to the meeting, covering consultations, objections, representations, as well as the East Dorset and Purbeck local plans and the council's related policy. There are just a few ground rules before we go into the presentations. For each application, I will invite the case officer to introduce their item. Members of the public, planning agents, applicants and town and parish councils have been invited to make written submissions, and these will be read out by Kim Cowell and Chelsea Gollage. And they have not been involved with the preparation of any of these applications. These will be read out in the following order: public against, public support, applicant or agent, town or parish council, and then local member. Following public participation section of every item, I will ask officers if there are any salient points that they wish to clarify. I will then ask members if there are any questions or comments to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to comment. In order to run the meeting efficiently, may I request that members of the committee direct any remarks and questions through the chair, and I will invite members to speak in turn. Requests to speak need to be made via the chat facility. Please keep your video and microphones on mute when you're not speaking to maintain quality. If you wish to speak to a particular slide in the presentation, please refer to that slide number. At the end of the debate, for transparency, I will take the vote by roll call. The vote will be recorded in the minutes. If 3 or more members make the necessary request, we will have a recorded vote. If members lose their broadband connection or drop out for any reason, Please indicate when you're back online via the chat facility. Members will need to be present for the whole of an item to be able to take part in the debate and vote on the recommendation. Bearing in mind that this is going to be a long meeting, I've made a decision that after the first item, we will take a 5-minute comfort break, and it will be strictly 5 minutes, please. And due to the length of the agenda today, there will also be a break for lunch between 1 and 2 p.m. And we expect this to happen after item 8, Slough House, Slough Lane, Horton. So moving on then to the applications before us tonight, this morning. There may be a short gap while the presentations are loaded. So the first application is 62018 0606, Rural Exception Site for development of 28 dwellings, Reserve Matters application at Spyway Orchard, Dunford Drove, Langton Matravers. Tony Bird, I understand that you're going to take us through the presentation, aided by Colin Graham from Highways.
Yes, Chair, thank you, and good morning to everybody. Yes, I'm presenting this case. Hopefully you're able to hear me clearly, and also the PowerPoint presentation is in full view. Could you confirm?
Tony, could you please share your screen with me so I'm able to put your PowerPoint presentation up, please?
Okay. Are we there?
No, I can't see it yet, sorry.
Try again. Still not sharing?
No, sorry.
I'm not sure. I'm clicking the share button.
If you click the share button, it should show you your available screens, including your desktop. One of those options should be your presentation.
Do that again. Still not coming up?
No. I'll take the agenda down, try again.
Still not there?
No, I'm not seeing it, I'm afraid. What's happening when you click the share button?
Well, everybody's coming up.
When you click share, can you see a few options of different screens, including your desktop? Ah, right, there we go.
There we go.
It's just come up. Are you able to, there you go, say PowerPoint. Right, I'll just pop that live. Okay, you're live.
Thank you very much. Apologies for that, Chair. Hopefully you can now hear me and see the PowerPoint. And good morning to everybody. As you have seen, Chair, this is an application, members, this is an application for reserve matters approval pursuant to the grant of an outline planning permission for a site at Spyway Orchard, Durnford Drove, Langton Matravers. It's a development of 28 dwellings, of which 22 are affordable houses and 6 are open market houses. And the application is for reserve matters, expressly access, layout, scale, appearance and landscaping of the development. The site in question, turn to my laser point, is located south of the village of Langton Matravers, where probably members know the area relatively well. Swanage, Coast, Worth Matravers, the quite well-known Dancing Ledge Cliffs to the south of the site, and the site we're looking at is just located in the area here. So moving into more detail, this is the high street of Langton Matravers, the B3069. This is Durnford Drove, this is Gypshays, this is the Hyde, and the application site is located in here and comprises, I think it's about 1.57 hectares. It's an existing agricultural building on the site, and what we can see around the site are a number of trees. These lines represent public footpaths in the vicinity of the site, and most particularly one that runs set in a southerly direction past a holiday accommodation called Langton House, and eventually leads down on National Trust land to the Dancing Ledge. So in terms of the application site area, that's the Durnford Drove. This is the footpath and access way to the holiday accommodation, as well as the car park, National Trust car park, that leads to the footpath at Dancing Ledge. So it's the site area, and that's the footpath on the northern edge of the site, and this is the nearest neighbouring property in Durnford Drove, and just off here is the end of the Hyde properties. In terms of the history of the site, as you will be aware, Outline Planning Permission was granted on appeal in 2017, and as part of the appeal consideration, the inspector had before him this illustrative layout plan indicating a nature of development and type of development. And zooming in a bit more detail on that, we can see the red line of the site, and I'll make a comment about that in the area there in relation to the written the document that you've received from the local community. But that's the existing agricultural building. This building here is an enclosed swimming pool structure that forms part of the Langton House holiday accommodation. So looking at where we are from a Google aerial view, Durnford Drove, Gypshays, the Hyde, public footpath, Langton House, and the car park, National Trust car park leading to the Spyway. We can zoom, leading to Dancing Ledge. We can zoom in a little bit more detail on that if you wish to see. That's the site, and that's the entrance where the proposed road is going to be. Footpath runs along there. Langton House, swimming pool to Langton House, agricultural building, and again, end of the Hyde. So what I've got now is a series of photographs, some taken by me, some taken as part of the appeal submission in terms of a landscape and visual impact assessment that was presented at outline stage and considered by the inspector. First slide shows, for convenience, Chair, I've, as you've requested, numbered all the slides so that anybody wants to refer back to them at any time can clearly do so. This is the end of Durnford Drove. That's represents in effect the public highway. That's the access to Langton House, and the also public footpath down to the car park, National Trust car park and beyond. That's the boundary wall to the neighbouring property. And the site we're looking at in terms of the development bit is located in here. And what I've done, Chair, I've also, because of the importance of tree cover, both in terms of winter, when obviously there's no leaves present, and when there are leaves present, I've endeavoured to put two lots of photographs in each case showing a winter scenario, if you like, and a summer scenario. This is photograph taken from the appeal LVIA, and you see that's September 2016. So the leaves, and it's more or less in the same sort of position as my photograph, with the footpath sign, boundary wall to the neighbouring property, access up to site to Langton House. And here, members, you can see the nature of tree cover at that time. And moving along the footpath on the northern edge of the site, again, that's the boundary of that's the property, neighbouring property, that's the boundary, and this is the application site. Again, you see the periphery trees on there in winter, and in effect this is more or less the same photograph taken as part of the appeal LVIA. That's more or less taken from the same position that I took my photograph from, and again you can see the difference between summer and winter. And this is me moving further into the site along the footpath rather than looking into the site. That's the agricultural building, and that's the Langton House swimming pool. Just a note up saying I've got poor quality. I don't know if that's correct or not. Perhaps members could confirm that they are able to hear and see the presentation. Are you able to confirm, Chair, that you can see this?
Yes, I've got it very small on my screen, but yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. It just had a note up saying that the quality was not very good. So again, this is my walking along the footpath, looking into the site. So that's the agriculture, and you get some idea of the flavour of how the land topography is, and I'll show you an indication of that from the applicant's submission. And again, moving on right to the end now, this is looking from the Hyde. That's the public right of way, and that's the site in here beyond the line of the trees. And again, this is the appeal LVIA taken, of course, when everything's in leaf, more or less the same location as I took mine, which is at the end of the Hyde, looking across to the site, which is behind the trees, or includes the trees as well as behind the trees. And again, look, this is a street view photograph that I've taken going back to the site entrance, Durnford Road. You can see the access way going up to Langton House, and see the boundary wall of both the developing part of the site, and you see the nature of the trees, and you can also see beyond the other side of the access road existing trees as well. And that's taken April 2011, and there's a distinct and noticeable difference between the same shot in September 2011, where again the effect of leaf cover is very apparent. Moving along now, right towards the end of the site. This is the agricultural building in question. This is the access way that takes you into Langton House, and that's the swimming pool structure of Langton House. And again, this is the track that goes down towards the National Trust car park. And again, notice that's taken when leaf is not in full cover. This is a slide of what is now the boundary fencing placed alongside the site in question. This is just adjacent to the agricultural land and Langton House, with the Langton House swimming pool just behind there. That was erected after the appeal decision, some time ago now, but after the appeal decision, and it was done at the, my understanding, on behalf of, or in request of the owners of Langton House. And this is a shot now taken from the Hyde. This is Durnford Drove, and this is the rear garden of the first property as you turn into, sorry, not the Hyde, into Gyps Hayes. If you turn into Gyps Hayes and you look across the rear gardens, that's the agricultural building we're talking about. So all these trees here are part of the application site. So that's the last building on Durnford Drove as you drive up, where the public footpath runs along, and that's the agricultural building. So that gives a flavour of the view from the site from that direction. So moving on now to some slightly wider shots undertaken by the appeal LVIA that the inspector considered, and this is a shot looking from one of the public footpaths across towards the site. That's Langton House, and the site is just in here. Langton House, this is a distance of 0.37 kilometres away from the site in question, and we're on what's called the limestone plateau in terms of character of the area. On now to continuing on that, there's the National Trust car park. This is the footpath that takes you down towards Dancing Ledge, and this photograph was taken here, looking again back towards the site, Langton House, and the site in question is within the treed area beyond that. I think my final photograph, Chair, and again the appeal LVIA, and it's looking down Durnford Drove. So the site in question is here. The end of Durnford Drove is just there, and you can just see the first of the or the nearest of the neighbouring properties to the site. And this slide, Chair, is contained within the current planning application, and it's what the application describes as a contextual analysis, and it just gives, these are photographs taken of the buildings in and around the application site, and dotted from the numbers, and gives a flavour of some idea of the nature and variety of buildings in the immediate vicinity of the site. If I may, Chair, can I just have a sip of water? Pause for a moment. Thank you, Chair. Apologies. So in terms of the nature of the proposed layout, this is the point of access at the top end of the Durnford Drove public highway. Road comes in, 5.5 metre road with a footpath serving the development, and the layout is basically semi-detached properties in the main with a terrace of 4 units and a block at the very end of 1-bedroom apartments. And I think the description and the amount of particular units is set out in the report. But as far as this plan is concerned, what I've done, I've marked more or less the distances between and around the properties. So the gap between the remaining stone wall and the nearest dwelling here is 20 metres. The gap between the boundary of the site and the rear of the nearest unit is 20 metres. And at the closest point, the gap between the footpath and the flank wall of the nearest property is 15 metres. In terms of the layout, what's noticeable is that this end of the site, in accordance with the already approved biodiversity mitigation plan, is an ecological area that's there for the purposes of ensuring that some protected species that were found on site retain their habitat, in particular great crested newts as well as badgers. And you've got along the edge of the site some nature conservation corridors are meant for badgers as well as birds, and more recently corridors for great horseshoe bats, I understand. Sorry, Chair, I'm losing my voice here a bit. Apologies. And also what's indicated on this plan by the green line, more or less, is the tree protection zone that's set out in the approved arboricultural method statement, which basically means that there's measures inbuilt to the outline planning permission that lays down the nature of protection that has to be implemented on site to protect the remaining trees from being harmed during construction works. So moving on now, Chair, to something that's a little bit of a busy plan here, but hopefully you can understand what it's all about. This is the tree survey drawing and also shows contour lines of the site. So that's the Durnford Drove access, that's the public footpath onto the north of the site, and that's the public footpath leading down to an accessway leading down to Langton House. What I've shown on here, Chair, is the squares represent the contour lines. These lines, what the figures for contour lines, these lines are at ½ metre gaps. So at the lower end of the site down here, you're at a datum of 75 metres, moving up across the site to 77.5, and then towards the agricultural building at the highest part of the site, this is the 80-metre contour line. So you can just get a flavour from that, Chair, how the fall of the land. And what I've also marked on here, you'll see from the report that as a planning condition, in agreement with the applicant, we've defined precisely which trees should be removed from the site to enable the development to go ahead. And these are marked by the yellow stars represent single trees. There's 2 here, 2 here, and 1 there. And the blue stars represent groups or parts of groups of trees that are the 37 trees that are going to be felled as necessary to allow the construction of the development. Moving in again, Chair, to the application access, and this is looking at it in more detail, and I'm sure the highway engineer will explain this to you if necessary, but in broadly speaking, that's the existing curb line that you can see on this drawing here from the end of Durnford Drove. That's the access to the neighbouring property. that's the public right of way that runs into the site, and what the highway engineer has worked out is the best way to approach this area, because this is a shared surface at this point, obviously with the footpath and the access, and it is a relatively narrow, certainly a further south narrow track, is the sort of a raised area, different coloured tarmac to indicate to users that you're on a shared surface. Once you get into the site here, you've got a proposed footway as well as the 5.5 metre wide road. And what the applicant's also proposing to do is to avoid pedestrians from the development itself having to walk this way to get round to the public footpath. They're just putting in a little link here so that people, as far as the site are concerned, can access that public footpath without having to traverse this particular point there. So in terms of the next slide, Chair, what I've shown, this one shows application sections. So the sections I'm going to show you are first of all across the site, looking that way, and then looking that way, and then at various points across here, and across here. Taking these first of all, looking across the site, this is the Durnford Drove, and this is the little and the access way coming in here, and that's the stone wall along the Durnford Drove. Coming into the site, you traverse along here, past the first two units, continue on, and then here to the end of the units, which is the block of 6 apartments, and then the land goes down to the nature conservation land or the ecological land, which is located here. So then looking at it the other way, as you come into the site, your access from the stone wall is here, so this would be on your right hand side. As you look at it, you pass the agricultural building, which is remaining, and then you meet the first of the semis, then the terraced, and then the remaining semis as you go towards the end of the development. And again, the nature conservation land or the ecological land is located here. So looking at this in terms of sections, again, as you come into the site, you're coming in and down the roadway here. These are the buildings you see on your left hand side. That's the public right of way or the footpath on the southern boundary, and that's the neighbouring property over here, and that's the existing agricultural building. And so you can see the access coming in, and you move further along the site, and that's the swimming pool. And again, so you can get an indication of where the land lies in relation to the topography and neighbouring buildings and the site boundary. And then finally, Chair, this is a section towards the end of the site where you have if you recollect from the plan, there's a little parking area here, and as you're coming through, and then beyond here is Langford House, and then again the land's dropping down towards the public footpath. And so again, part of the application, we've got a landscape strategy which sets out, this is the clearest of plans at this scale, but sets out in detail the general nature of how the landscaping is going to be progressed. This is the area of nature conservation land, and these are the wildlife corridors. And this plan indicates that at this area there will be a concentration of larger, more indigenous trees, but within the site itself, certainly there is some scope for some significant planting. A lot of the planting will be smaller scale hedges and with more ornamental type trees in nature. Also here you will see there's a stone wall with cock and hen feature, and that's the intention to construct that around as many of the front boundaries of the scheme as possible. So in terms of the buildings themselves, in terms of their scale, and that's as you will see from the report, Chair, the nature of one of the reserved matter considerations, scale being the overall size and of the buildings in question, their length, their depth and their height. And in this case, fairly standard sort of scale to semi-detached 2-storey houses, overall height of 9 metres, This is plots 1 and 2, and that is sorry, Chair. And that is the fairly typical height of these buildings. There's none any higher than 9 metres. Some of them are a little bit lower than that, in the region of 8.5 metres, but that represents the maximum height of the buildings. And as far as the appearance of the buildings is concerned, they're relatively straightforward composition, nicely ordered, and no particular deficiencies in their overall composition. And what you've also got here, Chair, is an indication of the nature of the building materials that they're intending to use. There is a materials palette set out in the application details, and you can see in this instance we've got stone walling, brick coins, and slate roofs, I believe. I've not done slides for all these buildings, Chair, because there's obviously quite a lot of them, but I've given you a flavour, I think, as we go through of every single relevant of the buildings that would help. And also, in response to a question that was raised, giving an indication of the nature of the floor layout of the units. These are the first 2 plots, numbers 1 and 2, and these are 4-bedroom units. And again, you can give an understanding of the layout. Fairly typical: lounge, kitchen, diner, and 4 bedrooms at first floor level. You know, relatively straightforward as semi-detached houses go. And then moving on to the only terrace building we've got within the block. And again, these are 9 metres high, well ordered compositions, nothing unduly exciting, but fairly straightforward. And again, you can see the nature of the materials that we're talking about. Slate roofs, obviously rendered walls, as well as brick coins, and on some elevations, on the front elevation, we've got brick gables again with the feature coins. This is the apartment block. It's the largest of the single buildings, but it turns corners, so it doesn't look as a large mass in itself. And again, 9 metres high or thereabouts, with slate roof, and again the mixture of brick and render with coins. And I put this plan up. Councillor Izzard asked me a question beforehand. Could I show her the nature of the 1-bedroom accommodation? She wanted to understand what that actually was. So this is what I've done. This is the ground floor for that building, and again you can see from this how sort of broken up it is in relation to its overall massing, and that's the first floor of the building. And the ground floor accommodation is entrance. The units are entranced from as far as sorry, I got this wrong way around actually. This is the first floor, and that's the ground floor, so I've got it wrong way around. Apologies for that. So the first floor of this building is accessed from here. The ground floor unit is accessed from here, and they're all the same layout: combined kitchen, living and dining room, with a single bedroom and a separate bathroom. And again, this unit here is accessed on the ground floor from here, and this unit accessed here, and the one above it is accessed from here going up to the first floor here, and the final one is accessed from here going up to the first floor there. Apologies, I got that the wrong way round, Chair. In terms of the nature and background to the site, you would have obviously seen a lot of representations from local residents, as well as the pack that you've recently received from residents. But I just thought it was important to try and set out the nature of what we're actually talking about here. I think it's important to understand that you know, the outline planning permission here, and as you know, where it's supported by a Section 106 agreement or a planning obligation, and that establishes the principle of a rural exception site development at this location. It also sets out expressly the number of dwellings, that is the density of the development, and the type of dwellings. Again, clearly 22 affordable and 6 open market properties. And it's important to distinguish here, Chair, between what we're talking about when we talk about the scale of the reserved matters. Scale in reserved matter terms relates to the individual sizes of buildings, their length, their width and their height. What it doesn't relate to is the density in terms of number of dwellings, because in this case that's already set out as part of the outline planning permission. And again, what the outline planning permission also does, it lays down express conditions in relation to surface water management, fell drainage as well, and they are both very importantly pre-commencement conditions that cannot be complied with in advance, that must be complied with in advance of any work being undertaken on the site. And if you like, this is all part of a stage process leading from an outline planning permission to implementation of a development. And also what the outline planning permission does, it commits and secures a biodiversity mitigation plan, as well as an arboricultural method statement in relation to particularly tree protection measures for retained trees. Those are set, all these matters are set within the outline planning application. They're not part of reserve matters consideration, as we said here. And the planning obligation secures in detail the affordable housing entirely in accordance with the RES policy of the local plan. And Chair, matters that have been raised a lot in the submissions about things that are not material planning considerations, and I want to emphasise those. That includes land ownership, covenants and easements. None of those, as members are obviously aware, material considerations in relation to the determination of any planning application, and certainly not in relation to this reserve matters submission. Going through these in some detail, Chair, if I may, and perhaps with reference to the appeal decision as far as the first of those issues are concerned, that's the impact on the character of the appearance of the area, including the AONB and protected trees. As I've outlined, what the inspector saw when he considered the appeal was not just the extensive representations that were made again at that time from the local community. He also considered obviously the issues raised by members when they refused the planning application, and again it was particularly in relation to the impact on the AONB that was the concern of the council at that time. And the inspector had before him all the representations. He obviously had the views as expressed at that time by all the consultees, including the AONB landscape planning officer at that time, the tree officers. But it's important, I think, here to emphasise that at that time the council were not considering the scheme to be major development within the terms of the relevant section of the MPPF at the time. And that's quite important because, again, a lot of reference in the representations about this being major development. It's not major development in the terms of the MPPF, which at the time, the relevant paragraph was, turn to the inspector's decision, paragraph 116 then of the MPPF. It's a different paragraph now, where major development in the AONB is considered to be basically not permissible. But when the MPPF talks about major development, it doesn't talk about it in terms of major development as is defined commonly for administrative and processing purposes, which is more than 10 units. Major development is referenced by the impact on the particular location. And at that time, the council did not consider the scheme represented major development within the meaning of the MPPF, nor did the inspector, even though that's been highlighted quite a few times by local residents and indeed in the pack that you have. In terms of highway safety access and parking, I'm sure the engineer will confirm, but as far as, again, this reserve matter application is concerned, what's not being considered is the suitability of the wider highway network, including the access and junction arrangement for Drove and the High Street. That's all been dealt with by the inspector in the appeal. Rightly or wrongly, as far as the local community is concerned, the inspector considered the proposal acceptable in that sense. So what we're really looking at in more detail is the specifics here of the access arrangement into the site and the level of car parking and the manoeuvrability and turning facility and so on in the development itself. And secondly, impact on residential amenity. Again, I think you probably would have been seen as far as the layout's concerned and the dimensions that this new development is away from nearest existing properties. There really is sufficient space, and even allowing for variations in topography and so on. There really is not going to be any harm to neighbouring amenity, and within the site itself, the layout is very relatively straightforward in the sense that gaps between buildings and scale of buildings in relation to each one is entirely acceptable, and there are no issues. And as far as ecology and biodiversity is concerned, as I've said, there's already a mitigation plan secured by planning condition attached to the outline planning permission. That will, however, and is in the process of being modified to align properly with all the details that are within this planning application. Obviously, at the time, the biodiversity mitigation plan referenced the indicative layout that was submitted, and it will now need to reference whatever is eventually approved as a reserve matters scheme, and so there'll be a need to realign that to make sure it properly marries. And we've had an application to do that on what's called a non-material amendment. It's a separate application, and that will be dealt with once the reserve matter scheme here has been determined, and if it's in accordance with the recommendation, approved. More generally, as far as housing type is concerned, again, there's a lot of detail set out in the section 106 about how that will be made affordable in terms of a local housing need in perpetuity, and I'm sure obviously most members are relatively familiar with rural exception sites and the mechanism that the 106 provides for securing that. The local community, in particular the parish council, did consider that there weren't enough small units here to address the greatest local housing need in Langton and Travers. And there's an element of truth in that, because that for sure is the greatest housing need, but that of course doesn't mean to say there isn't other housing needs. And you would have seen the comments from the Housing and Naval Officer, who confirms that this does meet the identifiable housing needs in terms of the RES policy, and that yes, it's not going to meet all the need, and not going to meet certainly all the need for smaller units, but it is going to meet, and there's absolutely no confidence, no doubt at all, entirely confident that the development meets identifiable local housing need. So in summary, Chair, as far as the reserve matters are concerned, and again they're set out in detail in the report under section 6 as to what actually reserve matters comprises. Obviously, officers are satisfied that all matters have been properly and adequately addressed, and there aren't any unacceptable issues. We've endeavoured to use planning conditions to make sure that all the details are fully acceptable. And there are not any objections, for example, in relation to OMB from the Landscape Planning Officer. The tree officer is satisfied with what's being proposed. The highway officer is satisfied. No objections from Natural England. There are some comments in relation that you would have seen from the drainage authorities, both the LLFA as well as Wessex Water. And whilst they are matters they've raised do represent issues that the developer will have to overcome prior to being able to commence work, they are not matters being dealt with as part of this planning application. So even if the applicant secures reserve matters approval, there's still some very important issues, and no one to underestimate the significance of the conditions and other details that have yet to be dealt with. So this is again one step in the process towards the implementation of a scheme that already has outline planning permission. So moving on, Chair, to the conditions. And again, this is an opportunity to respond to the question raised by, was it Councillor Took, did you say, Chair, about the nature of these planning conditions? If I've understood it correctly, Councillor Took effectively was saying, why are we, how can we be dealing with reserved matters when in the effect of these conditions is that we're not dealing with all the reserved matters? Well, the effect of these conditions is to, we have had all the details relevant to enable us to make a decision on every aspect of reserved matters. But what we've done here is seek to ensure that some aspects of those details are properly clarified or defined more carefully in relation to the progression of the development. So, for example, obviously there's a standard approved plan list, the list of trees to be removed. What we've done is, by that condition, as members would have seen, is set out very precisely what trees can be removed to facilitate the construction of the development. It makes it, it's not that we didn't have that information. What we've done is, in conjunction with the developer and the tree officer, is secured a very precise condition that defines without any doubt about what trees are necessary to be removed to facilitate the actual works themselves. And so it's expressly very clear, rather than any lack of understanding about what trees are going to be affected as far as the development is concerned. Next condition that we put in, excluding drainage details, that's really a kind of belt and braces job, in the sense that some of the submitted drawings did show drainage details. It's true to say the LFA are not entirely convinced about those, and that's been conveyed on to the applicant, and the applicant is aware of the concerns and issues that have been raised about drainage. And it's a matter, as I said, that's yet to be progressed in terms of satisfactory details. But what we're doing by that condition here is making it abundantly clear that anything that's shown upon the drawings are not part of the reserved matters approval, and can and only must be dealt with at some future stage as part of the conditions of the planning permission. The next condition is approval of materials. We have got, and you would have seen from the application drawings, information about the overall palette of materials, and the OMB landscape planning officers confirm that they're acceptable, and officers are satisfied generally they are acceptable. But what this condition does is requires precise details of the manufacturer's product and information to be submitted to the council and approved. And that's a fairly standard approach, because if you, for example, you think about it, if someone says, I want to construct in red brick and slates, there's an enormous variety of red bricks, an enormous variety of slates material produced by manufacturers, and in most instances at planning application stage, applicants are not in a position to fully provide details of the particular manufacturer and the precise nature of those materials. So that's a fairly standard approach. It's not that we haven't got details on materials, we have, and we're relatively satisfied that, but we just want the extra precision associated with that. And as far as walls, fencing and ground levels are concerned, again, we've got information with the planning application about those matters, but again, in discussion with the developer, and most particularly as far as some of the ground levels are concerned, the applicant has put in what you might consider to be a worst case scenario as far as ground levels are concerned. But they've also acknowledged that some of these might be less when they actually get down to looking at the precise details of construction. Sorry, Chair, I don't know if we lost that. Are you still? Is my PowerPoint still visible, Chair?
Yes, you're still going strong.
So I lost it for a minute on my screen. Sorry, Chair. So what we're doing now is making sure that those precise details are dealt with by this planning commission. It's not that we haven't got the details, and it's not that we necessarily expect monumental changes as far as these details are concerned, but we just want to make sure that they are entirely consistent, and anything that's done here is not done unnecessarily in relation to the impact of the development. And again, approval of new tree and shrub planting. We already have a planting strategy or landscape strategy you would have seen. We've already got details of what the trees are and what the mix and what the nature of the shrub planting is. Again, there's been some comments from the landscape planning officer about some of those matters in detail, whether it should be tree species X instead of tree species Y. And so that is a condition that will enable us to bring forward in terms of detail exactly what those, what information is necessary in regard to those. There's also, and I should perhaps have pointed this out earlier, as far as the approved biodiversity mitigation plan and the amendments that we're likely to come forward with if this scheme is approved, there's some express requirements within that for particular types of tree planting. And the 5-year planting maintenance, again, is just a standard condition that, as you probably know, all landscaping is required to be maintained on most significant developments anyway for a period of 5 years, and that's just a standard condition on that. I think within the landscape information we possibly did have an outline of what the maintenance is, but this requires express details, and by virtue of that planning condition requires it to be maintained for a 5-year period. And the next 3 conditions are relatively standard, straightforward highway conditions. First one requires the access to be laid out as part of the development and the timing of that layout. Next one requires the vision displays, which you may or may not recollect was shown on the little highway junction drawing. And this condition simply can't drain from the site onto the highway. Again, relatively straightforward conditions, nothing unusual or unique about them as far as this scheme is concerned. The final condition is a little bit unusual in the sense that external lighting can and would ordinarily be considered as part of a landscaping scheme, but in this particular instance no external lighting was proposed as part of the planning application. So we've imposed a condition which seeks to ensure that there's absolute future control by the council over any external lighting proposals that may wish to may come forward. And then of course there's the relatively conventional informative notes, but I should just mention the sill figure that we've given. As members are probably aware, social housing or affordable housing schemes can apply for an exemption as far as sill is concerned. The quoted figure you have is in broad terms the figure without the social or affordable housing relief, I think is the term applied, and that's because that has to be sought by a developer. It's not automatically given. An applicant has to apply for it and it has to be granted. So potentially, well, I can't imagine it would ever happen very often, a developer of a social housing scheme could forget to claim his exemption and he would be charged and would have to pay the full amount. With that social housing relief, the figure is going to be significantly less than that, probably about half or even less than half potentially than the £500,000 figure quoted within the planning application. But anyway, maybe around half that figure, something of that order. And the final matter I wish to raise as far as condition is concerned, Chair, is the construction management plan. You would have seen that the parish council have asked and put forward in their application submissions a request for the imposition of a construction management plan type condition. It's a sort of condition that should have been applied at outline planning application stage rather than reserved matter stage, because it's a rather fundamental condition, so it should have been applied then. It wasn't applied then. It wasn't asked for by the parish council at that stage, nor indeed by the district council. So it wasn't applied by the inspector. I've discussed with the applicant's agent whether this could or should be imposed. It's a pre-commencement type condition, so we would always require now to discuss those with applicants before their imposition. The applicant as the agent is the same view that technically it's not really a reserved matter condition. It should have been applied at outline planning application stage, but if members committee feel that it's something that they feel is necessary, then they would have no objection. I've got a draft wording if you want to see that, of what that might be if you need to. But the applicant also points out that the the relatively responsible company, a housing association or housing provider, and so they would always, in any event, do their best endeavours to make sure that the development was undertaken with minimum impact on the local community. And I think, Chair, with that, my voice is coming back a little bit, but I think I'll stop there because I rather suspect there's going to be plenty of questions that I may well be required to answer. But if you want to see that draft condition, I can show you that slide if you want to see it now or at some time later. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tony. I think it would be useful showing that slide now.
Do you wish me to read it, or is it fairly clear?
Just leave it up on the screen. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask Colin Graham from Highways if at this point there is anything he wants to add. Colin.
Good morning, Chair. There's nothing I would need to add, actually. I think Tony's done a very good job of presenting that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now, there seems to be some interest in a site visit, but I've not had anyone actually come forward and say they wish to propose a site visit. If that's the case, then I will move on to the representations. Members can, of course, at any time decide to propose a site visit, and at that point we will stop the debate where we are and take that. Okay, Councillor Brenton, I can see that you wish to propose a site visit. Councillor Brenton, can you turn your mic on if you wish to speak?
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yep, loud and clear, thank you.
I would like to propose a site visit on the grounds that the situation has changed as regards the expectations of sustainable housing, and this site, because of the tree cover, bears other considerations. Does that make sense?
I will ask for a response from a planning officer.
Yes, Chair. As far as regarding changed expectations, I'm afraid that's again a matter of, seems to me to be about the fundamentals of the scheme rather than these details that we're talking about. It's not an opportunity here to review whether or not sustainable housing is appropriate in this location or not. That's already gone past as far as the appeal is concerned. As I said, the considerations here are expressly as set out in section 6 of the report. So if the request is on the basis that there's something substantial as far as sustainable housing is concerned, then that's not again a matter that's up in front of us. There's no material change as far as planning policy considerations are concerned in relation to the local plan outline planning application stage and now. So I'm not entirely clear as to on what basis that comment's been made with regard to the need for a site visit, Chair.
Chairman, if I may come in as well, just to supplement what Tony's just said. Kim Cowell here.
Thank you.
I thought I'd put my name at the end of that sentence. Sorry. The inspector, I've got the inspector's decision letter here. The inspector considered the principle of development and the matters that were reserved for future consideration were access, layout, scale, appearance and landscaping. So those are the matters that are before you.
That is what I think we need to talk about. I think,
Alex, we can certainly have a debate on that during the meeting.
Okay.
Do we need to have a site visit to have that debate?
I think it is very easy to look at a plan and sort of assume that that's what will happen, but actually on site you might see that there are issues that affect literally the way the houses are laid out.
Okay.
Chairman.
That's my opinion. That's
Chairman.
Councillor Azard.
Thank you, Chairman. I did put a note to you to say I'd like to speak immediately after the presentation, although I didn't ask for saying.
I did put something in the chat asking if you still wish to do that, and I got no reply.
I'm sorry, I didn't look at it. I was so concentrating on the presentation. Thank you to Tony Bird for the presentation. It's very comprehensive and very good. But the reason I would like a site visit is about the pinch point and the access to the site, which is a reserved matter, because on my visit to the site a couple of days ago, I'm afraid in the presentation it doesn't show up several things that I picked up on that particular visit, and I do think that it would make a lot of difference to the decision of this committee, and I do think it will be substantial benefit to the committee to go and see it at some point, because I think the single track road which with the footpath on it, which goes up towards Dancing Ledge, has also got a big ditch on the side which wasn't mentioned, and it's a single track road, and also with a wall on the other side, so it can't be widened, and that comes down to the pinch point, which is the footpath off to the east, and which actually then is adjacent to the first house in Durnford Drove, which is Arbutus. And that actually, I think there's a dispute with the boundary with that first bungalow, because although their wall is a rounded wall on the corner, I noticed there's a cone put there that the actual boundary is a sharp corner, and in the actually slide 25, it shows part of that coloured surface as taking in that corner, which I think belongs to Arbutus. The other thing I noticed there, where the dog bin was shown on one of the slides on that corner, that there actually has been put in a water meter in the ground right on that corner, which is the one that's going to be excavated for the surface. So I do believe that actually these aspects weren't brought out, and I think that there definitely needs to be a site meeting to get a proper view of that particular access right on that corner, where there's a single track road, there's a public footpath, there is a Durnford Drove which is quite narrow, although there's a turning circle at the end there, but that would really cause lots of visibility problems for people on the single track road and even coming out of the site. So I believe we need to actually have a good view of that, and the committee needs to go there to look at that particularly. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Azard. What I need from you is a very succinct form of words to form a proposal for a site visit, and they must be on planning matters, because I need to have a proposal that can be seconded and then voted on, and I need planning reasons as to why.
All right. Well, actually, I think it is the aspect that I don't know if somebody can put this in proper words, but I can't think of the NPPF actual things, but it's certainly the access that is very narrow, very pinch point, and visibility. So I don't know if one of the planners could put down what the NPPF says about visibility, and also actually the impairment of coming across a public footpath and actually encroaching on a neighbour's property. There seems to be an issue or a dispute with that, so I don't know, that needs sorting out. So how can we put that in words? I'm not very good at putting those down. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I think Chair, may I comment on the aspect of land ownership?
Who's that?
Sorry, Tony Bird. Apologies.
Okay.
If I can refer to my PowerPoint.
Can you put it in projection mode, please?
Just doing it again. Are we there, Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going back.
Let me just get the right one. Yes. First of all, Chair, looking at the outline planning application site. This is the land subject of the outline planning permission. The pinch point you're talking about, again, the pinch point you're talking about is just here.
Yeah.
We can zoom in on that. Look at that in more detail. It's just in here.
Yes.
That's the land subject to the outline planning permission. Ownership issues, if there were ownership issues, should have been identified at that stage, and they weren't, not in that sense. We're not now looking at the extent of this red line here as part of this planning application. That's already set within the outline planning application. All we have to be satisfied is, as far as the access arrangements is concerned, that they are within that red line. There's nothing more, nothing less that we need to be satisfied about as far as the reserved matter application is concerned. If, and I have to say, I have provided the applicant's agent with a copy of the submission that was put into you from the local community, and they dispute the claims about their rights to carry out this development. But that's not a planning matter at all. It's an entirely civil matter between the parties, and if the person in question has rights of ownership that prevent some aspect of the development coming forward, then obviously the applicant will have to come back to the planning authority to deal with that in whatever way it is. But as it stands, that's the extent of land subject to the outline planning permission, and it's not a matter for reconsideration as part of this planning application. As I said, all the council has to be satisfied now is that the land on the details rather that are proposed within the reserved matter planning application comply with those red lines. Nothing more, nothing less. And that the existence of a water main or a water meter, again, irrelevant as far as the planning judgment is concerned.
Chairman, can I come back? And I still think the access is very dangerous there because of the single track road going up to Dancing Ledge. As the planning officer said, it is one of the major beauty spots actually along the coast of the Jurassic Coast, and actually that road is used amazingly a lot. When I was there, I counted, and I was just standing about 5 minutes, 20 cars went past me to go up to the National Trust car park. Now, several stopped and asked me whether it was open, and I said, I've got no idea. I think well, that's irrelevant.
Okay,
but
it's irrelevant.
It says, I'm just saying that's a single track road. If you notice how narrow it is, with a ditch, which wasn't mentioned on the eastern side.
Yeah.
And
Councillor
yeah,
I do take your point on that.
Yeah.
However, the principle has already been established with the outline application.
Yeah.
Chairman, would you just sit if I read out? I'd made a note of what Councillor Ezzard had said, and I could summarise in terms of her proposal was visibility and highway safety issues. I'd like to bring members back, if I may. I've got a copy of the inspector's decision again before me, and in relation to some of the points that have been raised, I'd just like to clarify what the inspector said, if I may. The inspector at paragraph 24 of his letter said, I have had regard to additional vehicles that would be generated as a result of the proposal. The illustrative layout shows that there be adequate space for sufficient on and off street parking within the site and for an access road of suitable width to allow two-way traffic flow. Furthermore, it is unlikely that the additional number of vehicles would cause such an increase in traffic flows on the local network as to materially affect its capacity or increase the risk of collisions. including at existing road junctions with Durnford Drove. Despite concerns raised by local residents about the junction with the High Street, the Council also confirms there were not any recorded accidents there within the 5-year period to the Council's case officer report being written, and that it meets the minimum visibility standards. There'd also be appropriate provision for pedestrian access to and from the site via footways. And I'll just conclude with paragraph 25, where he said, I've also had regard to there being no objections from the Highway Authority with regard to highway safety and traffic flows, and have no substantive basis to come to a different conclusion on this matter. The additional number of vehicles would also be unlikely to cause harmful material increase in air pollution in the context of existing levels of vehicle movements in and around the village. And that's what the inspector said when he was considering those points of appeal. I just thought it might assist your debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Councillor Ezzard, I think you're in some difficulty for the reasons for your request for a site visit, giving the inspector's comments on the appeal.
Yes, I know, but I think that actually that you know, actually physically being there is different from seeing photographs, even maybe Google ones and extra ones that have been put in. You know, and I do think there's going to be incidents there that are going to cause quite a lot.
I do take your point. However, Highways Authority have not identified anything, and the planning inspector did not identify anything. Therefore, the principle is established, and I cannot support a site visit on those reasons. Now, there is another member who is suggesting some other reasons, so I'm now going to move to Councillor Brenton for her proposal. Alex. Can you put your mic on, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, can now.
Okay. I'm more concerned about the effective use of this land and using the natural resources there prudently, which is part of NPPF paragraph 8.
Okay, this is purely in relation to a site visit. We're not going to debate the merits of the application because we have to have the representations read out. Okay. I have to be very clear on that.
I believe actually by standing in the site, one would get a better idea of how this could be laid out, how one might alter the application or ask the application to be altered. And I don't think you'll get that from just a picture.
Okay. Can I remind you that we have to deal with the application before us
and
not whatever we would quite like to see in its place?
But we could perhaps alter the conditions so as to increase the environmental benefits of the site. There were quite a few, perhaps not objections, but serious comments about biodiversity and such like, which I think would be highlighted by being on site. That was my opinion. Okay,
can I have an officer response, please, to the biodiversity mitigation, please?
May I just draw the members' attention again to condition 8 of the inspector's decision letter, where it reads, the development hereby permitted shall be carried out and maintained in accordance with the approved biodiversity mitigation plan dated the 24th of February 2015, agreed by Dorset County Council, the then Dorset County Council clearly, on the 25th of February 2015, unless a subsequent variation is agreed in writing with the local planning authority. So that mitigation has already been agreed, and as I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Okay. I'm sorry, members, but I've not had sufficient reason to agree to a site visit proposal. Therefore, I'm now going to move on to the representations received from the public, and there are quite a few, so it's going to take a little while to work through them. We have both Kim Cow and Chelsea Gollidge who are going to take turns to read them because, as I say, This is going to be a bit of a marathon. So who's going to start?
I'll start, thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's Chelsea.
So the first comments we've received are from Mike and Janet Robinson. We are writing to object to the reserved matters for the Spyway Orchard development. Access. We still have serious concerns about the access to the site. The footpaths to the east and west and the shared footpaths / vehicular access to Spyway car park all meet at the point of access to the development. The bin lorry and large vehicles have to go up backwards to Langton House past the shared access to the site. These footways are extremely busy with families, school groups, the elderly every day. It will become very dangerous with the cars and service vehicles leaving the development at the same point. Red tarmac isn't enough protection. Only last week a car got stuck in the gully, trapping vehicles in Spyway car park. Due to the heavy rainfall over the winter months, the water in the gully caused erosion and undercutting of the tarmac road, so making the edge of the road unstable. Layout. We note the street lamps will not be put in to avoid light pollution from such a sensitive site, quite rightly so. But to have high density housing without street lighting would not be safe for the new residents to walk home at night in total darkness, and they will be more vulnerable to crime. This shows that the site is not compatible with what residents would expect, and the needs of people and the environment cannot be achieved. Scale. The scale of the development is far too big to be tagged onto the outside of a village boundary. The current definition of affordable housing doesn't meet local need, so it's too much housing without the benefit required. This is a major development. Drainage. Flooding is a big problem, and we are very concerned that the reserve matters are being considered without the drainage being sorted. The layout is going to have to be changed considerably to avoid trees and houses being within the required distance of drains. We feel that you cannot approve something that is going to have to change. We ask that you listen to residents' very real concerns. The next is from Barry Mays. I write concerning application 6/2018/0606. I confirm my continuing objection to this proposed development and am aware that the planning process has reached that stage of considering certain reserve matters and their effects and the certainty that certain key conditions can be met. I am addressing two issues. Effect on surface water management. The meeting will discuss and agree certain reserve matters without any knowledge of whether the developer's proposed surface water management plan will be found to work prior to building commencing. There is a major concern in the community, highlighted by Dorset's lead flood authority, that this plan will not work in the specific geological environment of Spyway Orchard. This would require a major redesign of the system at the building stage, which will radically affect certain key reserve matters, apparently already agreed, e.g. layout, landscape and access. This is a feedback loop which makes a nonsense of the planning process. The planning committee must consider this real danger. AONB. Every aspect of the reserve matters discussion will impact on whether the inspector's requirement that damage to the AONB be minimised is met. The issue is complex and requires expert knowledge of AONB practice. The committee will not have available to it on June 3rd any expert advice of the intricacies of planning within the AONB, since access to any AONB expertise at the meeting is not considered necessary by the plan officer and has specifically been denied. I have great concern that the difference in significance between different parts of the AONB will regrettably not therefore receive the attention it requires, despite the diligence of the committee. The immediate environs of Spyway Orchard are just not any old AONB. They are the gateway to a unique part of this country and of national importance. Key government guidelines on different sensitivities apply, which I have seen nowhere discussed in any of the plan and documentation for this development going back over time. Indeed, the inspector himself regrettably failed to note these guidelines, which in my view should have given grounds for complaint. Spyway Orchard should be the national test case of the principle which these guidelines enunciate. It is critical therefore that these guidelines addressing visual receptor sensitivity be now addressed by the committee. They can be found in National Standard Guidelines for Landscape and Visual Impact Assessment, GLVIA 3. Kim will now read out the next statement.
The next submission is from Roy Kendall, and this is what he says. The reasons to grant approval of some of the reserve matters now need to take careful heed of recent events. Climate implications. There are now regular massive flooding problems which are occurring year on year. 2020 has again shown the climate is changing very quickly and current surface water drainage is inadequate in all areas of the country. Impact on residential amenity. Until and unless a foolproof and sustainable surface water drainage scheme exists that will without fail deal with the current and future rainfall, the statement that that acceptable, no demonstrable harm on existing neighbouring properties must be false. When our house was flooded, and they see below, the impact on us will be very considerable. From Christmas 2019 until early February 2020, the southern part of the Hyde had a small brook running through it. The water was surface water runoff from what is now the wooded grass site of Spyway Orchard, and from a spring fed by the soaked ground of Spyway Orchard. When built over, the problem will be multiplied many times over. Once reaching our house, Mistral, the surface water runs into a culvert, then a deep gully bordering our house. This culvert and gully deals with a huge amount of surface water at all times of bad weather, and it does not appear on any map, nor is it maintained by Wessex Water or other agency. I do not believe the situation is known or has been investigated by the applicant or its agents. Recommendation. Item 3 relating to surface water drainage is a vital and essential precondition. Until and unless the applicant has a robust and proper answer to this very important precondition, why are they proceeding with other much less important matters? Are they and Dorset Council going to quietly slip this through at a stage when it's too late to stop the development, with Dorset Council eager to get its hands on the SIL money? Chelsea will now read the next letter. Thank you.
The next letter is from Colette Rayson. I understand that every plan application must be assessed and determined on its own merits with an open mind, weighing up the relevant and genuine material issues. Spyway Orchard is outside the formally agreed rural settlement boundary for Langton Matravers. Reason, to avoid further encroachment into the countryside /AONB and into the setting of the World Heritage UNESCO site. Purbeck District Council have objected to every development on this site. The inspector's report states that through outline planning to build housing on this site is possible. All other matters are reserved. This is the key to the application going forward or not. Serious concerns raised by residents and consultees. RES site. The parish council have not supported this site as an RES. Community not consulted. Major development for Langton. Settlement boundary. The development is outside the rural settlement boundary, adjacent to the narrow lane within the UNESCO site setting, in the AONB to the area of Dance and Ledge. Affordable housing is of the 80% type. The Purbeck Plan, the Emerging Dorset Plan, shelter and housing provision bodies agree this type to be unaffordable in high market value areas such as Purbeck and other areas of Dorset. This is also recognised by government. Market housing. The 6 properties do not have a policy to protect them from becoming second homes or holiday lets. The district valuer originally advised that the development be based on 2 market houses. There are now 6. Access. Serious issues. Challenged impingements on adjacent landowners' land, a ditch to the west. Density. The AONB World Heritage Gateway should not be impacted by a major dense development. AONB serious concerns. The protection of the spectacular AONB at this point, the peace and tranquility of the visitor experience within the setting of the World Heritage Site sustains this area are paramount. This should be protected. Footpaths and rights of way. Residents and consultees have raised serious concerns. Flooding/surface water engineer. Residents and PDC and DC engineers have raised serious concerns. Habitats report. Residents and consultees raise serious concerns regarding loss of habitat, foraging land, loss of wildlife corridor for protected species, i.e. bats, badgers, owls, great crested newts, wild range of birds, deer and other wildlife. Trees. Residents and tree officers have raised concerns about loss of trees. Wessex Water. Residents in Wessex Water have both raised serious concerns. This application on balance does not genuinely meet the aims and objectives of sustainable development. There are too many valid and serious material concerns raised by both residents and consultees that outweigh any development on this site. Consultee responses may amount to an objection. Councillors, please question. Thank you. The next is from Judith and Dave Priddle. We wish to reiterate our objection to this large development. We support the need for truly affordable housing in Langton Matravers, but it needs to commemorate with the local need and interspread throughout the village. While there are no objections from the statutory bodies and consultees, there are serious concerns raised by most of them which have not yet been addressed relating to this application, so it is difficult to comment fully. The recommendation from the plan officer would imply that the application can be approved piecemeal without full recourse to local residents. Our objection comments are as follows. Access. The lane to the site is extremely narrow with an open ditch to the west side and is already used by a large amount of traffic, both motorised and pedestrian, to access Langton House, Spyway Car Park and Spyway Farm. Footpaths merge at the junction with Durnford Drove, where this new access road is proposed, presenting an additional hazard which has not been addressed properly. There are no passing places and limited visibility. The proposal to resurface part of the road with red tarmac to highlight the access to the site does not fit with the AONB requirements for limited visual impact. Layout. Commenting on the layout at this stage seems arbitrary because Wessex Water will require a change to the layout in order to accommodate the requirements for avoiding or relaying the large water main which traverses the site. However, the proposed layout does not take into consideration the requirement for adequate surface water management or sewage management with suitable connection to the existing system. Scale. This is a large development which will have a significant impact on the south side of the village. Some of the proposed houses appear tiny with little or no room for normal requirements for everyday living, limited storage space and no garages. Landscaping. Spyway Orchard is currently an open field surrounded by trees. The proposed landscaping includes retaining walls, 6-foot fences and the removal of a significant number of mature trees. We note the Plan Officer's recommendation is to limit this to 37 trees, but who will monitor this and what happens when the developer damages trees during building works? We also note there is a concurrent amendment to the AMS and BMP. Will there be an opportunity for further comment on these amendments? Appearance. Again, from the Plan Officer's recommendations, details appear likely to change. We note that there is a recommendation for no street lighting and no external lights on the properties. How will this be enforced? Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this application. The next comment will be read out by Kim.
Sorry, members. The next letter is from Elizabeth Earle, and I'll just read it. I apologise, I'm going to tilt my head because it's on a different screen. So, Dear Council members, it seems extraordinary that it's been proposed to build a large development of 28 houses at the narrow and often congested end of a minor road of just 15 homes. The road also leads to a property bond holiday development of 28 apartments and to the National Trust's recently enlarged car park for visitors to Dancing Ledge and the Jurassic Coast. Therefore, this minor road already has to accommodate considerable traffic. Currently, it's rare to be able to drive along the length of Durnford Drove without having to pull aside and negotiate passage with another driver. Additional traffic will inevitably lead to frustration and risk-taking. As I hope the Council members are aware, the road ends in a turning circle, which is not large. Sorry, I've just lost the letter. Just bear with me. Which is not large, but widely used, as parents deliver or collecting children from the village school and nursery have to use the road for parking. There is no school parking. This leads to considerable number of parents, children, buggies and prams walking along the pavement to access their cars at all times of the day. The turning circle is also crossed by a well-used footpath, a public right-of-way. The thought of an additional 56 cars from 28 homes with parking spaces allowed for this number and 100 plus pedestrians using a shared surface and feeding into Durnford Drove is very alarming and must be considered a dangerous proposition. In terms of the scale of the development, 28 houses squeezed into this small and unsuitable site is far too many. Of course, a village has to grow and develop, and affordable housing may be required, but new homes should be integrated within the village where newcomers can come and settle into the community and contribute to it. There is very little work for people in this area, and the transport links to outside towns are not good. It must also be remembered that there are planning applications for about 28 other homes within the village. This is in no way building for the needs of the village and the people within it, as Asta's agent put it in one of their only communications with residents. Such development will irrevocably alter the feel of our village, turning it into a suburb of Swanage and changing the area for residents and visitors alike. It is the responsibility of a local council to safeguard the preservation of its immediate environment, especially here in Dorset, where such a high proportion of it is designated AONB. The Parish Council in Langton has consistently opposed this development, but appears to be easily overruled by Dorset County Council. Elizabeth Earle. Thank you. I'll pass back to Chelsea.
The next comment is from Kate and Pierce Mutendra. Sorry about that. Thank you for your letter informing us of the Virtual Plan Committee to discuss the above reference plan application. We are writing to express our opposition to this plan permission based on the following issues we have found with the proposed plans. Access and highway safety. Looking at the access plans, it seems that to achieve the access to the estate, the developer will need to build the road across a piece of land on the southeast edge of our property along the footpath. This land leading to the proposed entrance of the development is actually part of our property as indicated on our title deeds, and we have neither been consulted nor given our consent for the developer to build on it. We have erected a bollard where we intend to move the wall right up to the edge of our property boundary, as at the moment, due to design considerations, the wall was not marking the actual edge. We hope you will be able to carry out a site visit before making your decision. This means the actual width of the entrance to the development will be much narrower than what is indicated on the plan documents. As there will be very little passing space between this wall and large vehicles such as refuse trucks, construction equipment and fire engines, this wall is liable to damage from passing vehicles should the proposed road be allowed. The road into the proposed development is so narrow that delivery and service vehicles are not going to be able to turn and will have to either reverse in or out, greatly increasing the risk of accidents in the case of damage, which we are sure will occur periodically. Can the council please provide clarity on who will be liable for this damage if drivers do not voluntarily report the damage to us? Drainage. We also take issue with the proposed drainage plans. As the council is aware, we suffer from flooding on Durnford Drove, as do the residents of the Hyde. The previous application on this site set very stringent conditions due to the complexity of flooding issues. We are not sure if these are met by design, but we hope the council will ensure they are. However, we have noted that the drainage design for the new scheme seems to introduce a new danger by diverting water from the south side of the site into the drain that runs underneath the turning circle. This water then runs in an open gully through properties on Durnford Drove and Gypsies before joining the sewer. When we have high rainfall and the surface runoff increases, not only does it flood the properties through which the gully runs through, it also causes the flooding of sewerage on the Hyde. Surely any scheme that increases the water flowing into the gully is a danger and cannot be permitted. Other issues of concern to us are the removal of mature trees in the site and the impact this will have on this gateway to the World Heritage Coast and area of outstanding natural beauty. The scale of the development, which is unprecedented in the village. With this in mind, we are still opposed to the development and request that you reject this application forthwith. The next is from Richard L. The proposed Spyway Orchard development is a major development by definition within the Town and Country Plan Order 2010, and as such, according to the MPPF, is unlikely to be appropriate within a Heritage Coast setting, and in paragraph 172 should be refused in a designated AONB. Nothing could be clearer and is ignored time again in the inspectors and case officers report. The overriding objection of residents and relevant consultees is that it will distract from the beauty of this unique setting. The case officer appears to officially and on record agree with these objections when he states in section 9.0, the inspector also acknowledges that the relatively high density of the proposal would, in visual terms, distract from the locally appreciated character. There is therefore no case for the committee to argue, as even the inspector agrees with our concerns. Any officer who has visited the site will appreciate the sensitive location, adjacent to a major access to UNESCO World Heritage Jurassic Coast. The report, section 9.0, admits that the development is relatively dense compared to nearby village properties. The suggestion that the dwellings would be softened and screened by trees assumes felling of mature, identified trees. The typical low-quality growth that defines so much of rural England provides real screening. Much of this will be removed during construction. The design is said to avoid unacceptable overlooking or any other matters to existing neighbouring properties. The site plan identifies a retaining wall between 0.5 metres and 1.6 metres in height along the northern edge. The new houses in plots 1 to 6 will be even higher than the ground level of the site, directly overlooking the entire gardens of the 6 lower properties in Durnford Drove. Wessex Water's report, 15th of the 1st, 2020, contains concerns and restrictions on the water main, foul and surface water sewage. Plots 9, 10 and 11 to 16 conflict with the water main. Changes in ground levels to rear gardens of plot 1 to 16, including embankments and any retaining structures, must not be constructed within the statutory easement width and must be moved. Ground levels above the main must not be adjusted. No surface water must be discharged into the public sewer. No building can come with 5 metres either side of the water main, 6 metres for trees. All these must be resolved before construction, leaving a simple question for all those officers present today. How can officers take a vote on the reserved matters of appearance, landscaping and layout when every site plan will have to be redrawn in order to comply? The development is as yet undefined and a vote for approval of reserved matters should not be taken today. Kim will read out the next comment.
Sorry, members. The next letter is from Duncan Hedges. He says, I write to you to lodge my objection to the Spyway Orchard development on the following grounds. Firstly, access. Despite the number of years this has been going on, and at least 4 different plans I've seen, the access to the site is still a cause for concern, in that there is still no clear and satisfactory solution. The numerous problems are well documented, so not repeated here. It seems to me that the approach is to put in plans and words that look okay on the surface, but fall down spectacularly when the detail is scrutinised. This must be done properly or not at all, and it is certainly not going to be a case of just wearing people down. Secondly, scale. The scale of this major development is not in keeping with the AONB, is in a rural exception area and contravenes government statutes. Thirdly, appearance and landscaping. Once again, the plans I have seen continue to change as attempts are made to push this through the planning process. The final appearance is highly likely not to be as pleasant as the drawings shown. Are the council able to ensure this development is keeping with its surroundings? Who's accountable? Fourthly, layout. My concerns are as per appearance and landscaping above. Your view of this case, ongoing for at least 5 years now, will have revealed that I am only one of hundreds of local residents who continue to object to this farcical sequence of events. The next letter is from Peter Bowyer. I write in the capacity of the chair of the Dorset campaign to protect rural England, the countryside charity. There is widespread and growing recognition of the importance of designations in Dorset. This application is associated with the designations of the AONB, a rural exception site, and the UNESCO World Heritage Site. The proposals at Langton will harm each of these designations. The site is in a particularly sensitive location. It is not just another piece of the AONB. The South Dorset AONB is recognised as an important area for a range of species and habitats. In view of the particular context of this site, may I request the Planning Committee defers making a decision on the matter of 2018-06106 until after a site visit. A site visit will confirm the special nature of the area and how the area will be damaged by this proposal. I realise the difficulties of the current coronavirus-19 pandemic don't lend themselves easily to a site visit, yet with the relaxation of the current lockdown, a site visit should be possible. The AONB and its protection is of paramount importance. This is widely recognised by Purbeck by residents, local councillors and tourists. Public confidence in the exercise of the planning function by the Eastern Area Planning Committee can only be enhanced by a site visit. Please accede to this request. I'll pass back to Chelsea now.
The next statement is from David Senior. The width of the access point is insufficient. The land to the east and west of the site is owned by 2 separate third parties. Both have objected to the application and both have stated clearly that the applicant must not use their land for any development, i.e. the applicant cannot widen site access. The committee will know third-party ownership is not a plan issue. In this case, it poses such a vital and significant factor for the applicant to overcome that is likely to cause the committee serious concerns during the collective decision-making process. The access point is so narrow it is passable by one single vehicle. Thus, HGVs face a unique problem which can cause considerable safety issues. HGVs presently reverse up the drove to reach the holiday property bond site, or reverse back down it. All HGVs, such as refuge trucks, presently conduct a 3-point turn at the junction of Durnford Drove and Gypshays, and then reverse a distance of 350 metres. Meeting a vehicle or wheelchair-bound disabled individual, a cyclist, or a mother and child at any point is a significant safety issue, but through such a narrow access point is considerably worse and not acceptable. There is no turning circle or pass in place at any stage from the turning head to Spyway car park. None are planned in the applicant's submitted documents. In the inspector's decision document in Para 22, it states, the illustrative site layout shows that there will be an adequate space for sufficient on and off street parking within the site and for an access road of suitable width to allow two-way traffic flow. It would only be possible to have two-way traffic flow if the applicant added passing bays or significantly increased the width of the access point, which would be seriously difficult due to third-party issues again. The relevant submitted documents show no footpaths passing through the access. Dorset footpath SE 16/15 is affected by this plan. A recognised right-of-way which has considerable footfall all year round is reduced to 0 as it passes through the pinch point. There are no planned footpaths passing through the proposed access pinch point. No street lamps or other external lighting fixtures may be installed in the development. Display areas must be maintained and kept free from all obstructions for the lifetime of the development. Not achievable. Display lines pass over third-party property and cannot be guaranteed. Object. The next is from Zoe Ingerfield. I am writing to register our objection to the above planning proposal for a small-ish orchard in a relatively inaccessible location. I cannot see how 28 dwellings and the increased traffic flow associated with these homes can be safely accommodated. Access to the site is limited and difficult, and the density of the dwellings is considerably higher than found in surrounding sites. It seems that there remain unsolved water drainage issues, which mean that no final landscaping plans have been submitted either. Hard, therefore, to comment on landscaping and appearance. These plans should not be approved as they are. Kim will read out the next comment.
Kim, can you turn your microphone on, please?
So I was just doing it. I was struggling to find the cursor. The next letter is from Sarah Bibra. I'm writing to highlight the worries that I have with regard to the planning application for Spyway Orchard. We've been living in Langton Matrava since 1974. The orchard was thus named because it was full of trees and small fruit and other. Many larger trees enjoyed a TPO but were felled nevertheless due to Mr. Turner's long-term view for development of the site. Every tree is precious at this time of climate change, and every tree still standing on the site should be preserved into the future. No newly planted one can perform the vital CO2 absorption in the way that a mature tree can. Protection of these magnificent trees must surely be a priority in planning decisions for the site. The orchard is not massive, and the prospect of 28 dwellings there is certainly going to look and feel crammed and cramped, sorry, my mistake. This will be an infill out of all proportion to the village as a whole and will cause endless problems with access onto the lane leading up to Langton House and Spyway Farm, and of course the ever-increasing car park facilities belonging to the National Trust situated at the top of the lane. Each dwelling is likely to own 2 cars or more, adding to the chaos of visitor traffic associated with our very popular Jurassic coastline. There are also delivery vans constantly serving Langton House, the most popular holiday property bond in the country. I don't think that the traffic problem has been adequately addressed, and I am not convinced that there is an answer if these 28 dwellings are to be built. I'll pass you back to Chelsea.
The next comment is from Bridget Mays. I wish to object to this application at Spyway Orchard. The inspector approved this on the condition that all reserved matters need to be satisfactory before this development could proceed. My particular objections are RE landscaping and access. Landscaping. These designs are not clear and until confirmed as compatible with all water utilities, sewerage and drainage requirements are not acceptable. Also, Spyway Orchard is widely visible, see images attached, from many directions from campsites and footpaths and even from the popular open-top double-decker Purbeck Breezer bus Route 40, all used by thousands of visitors each year. Spyway Orchard is the village's southerly green frame and provides key shelter from winter storms and absorbs increasingly heavy annual rainfalls. Felling existing trees will create a widely visible gap of suburban incompatible with Spyway Orchard's rural nature, and risks reducing the village's appeal for the many visitors who contribute to so much to the local economy. Access. The proposed access is not the same as in the plans presented to the inspector. It is dangerous to vehicles and pedestrians as it exacerbates and adds to the existing hazards in a road busy with year-round holiday traffic due to the holiday property Bonds Langton House apartments and the National Trust's car park beyond the Spyway Orchard site. Cars, work vehicles, delivery, service and utility vehicles generated by Spyway Orchard will lead to congestion and conflict with other vehicles at the turning circle and in the single track section of Durnford Drove, in what is regularly as busy road. There have been incidents of visitors' cars falling into a ditch of this section, blocking access to and from LH and the NTCP. Spyway Orchard's access road is dangerously close to the house arbutus. Drivers proceeding along Durnford Drove, which has a blind summit midway, down the slope to the turning circle, usually brake before accelerating to drive up the incline of the single track section. The Spyway Orchard access is a risk to vehicles and pedestrians and risks more bottlenecks. If the NTCP is full or visitors don't want to pay to park, Spyway Orchards offers more free parking, creating traffic further loading. More pedestrians will use the single track section. They do not use the public footpath. Gating in Spyway Orchard will create further safety issues. Spyway Orchard's traffic will interfere with access for emergency vehicles out to the cliffs, to LH and to Spyway Farm, and indeed access to the site for the same vehicles is problematic. It endangers pedestrians from many directions, including those crossing the turning circle to walk to Tomsfield campsite or to the village allotments. These plans are just dangerous. Please keep us safe. The next comment is from John Coombs. As residents of 3 Clayford cottages, we object to the application. Oh, sorry about that, Chairman. There seems to be one snuck in from a different application there. Let me just check the speakers list for that. Sorry about this, Chairman.
Apologies, everyone. Please bear with us for a moment.
Yeah. Sorry about this, Chairman.
Chelsea, I think while you're looking for that, given that the time the whole meeting is going to take today, we'll move on to the applicant and agent and parish and town, and then we'll come back to you for that last letter.
Yes, fine. Is that all right? Kim,
I'll read those while you look, Chelsea.
Yeah, apologies
okay.
for this, Chairman.
That's all right. Thank you very much. Over to you, Kim.
Kim Cowell. Thank you. The parish council comment. Submitted by the clerk, Dr. Sparks. On the 12th of December 2019, Langton Matravers Parish Council resolved that it objects to the Reserve Matters application on the following grounds. Firstly, access. There will be problems with the impact of increased traffic on, firstly, the narrow lane to Spyway car park and the ditch drainage there. Secondly, possible blocking of emergency vehicles. Thirdly, vehicle movement within Durnford Drove at its junction with the High Street, the B3069. The second point relates to landscaping. The proposed number and maturity of trees to be planted is totally insufficient to replace the unjustifiably large number of trees to be felled, some with TPOs. Dorset Council's biodiversity protocol must be followed. The third point relates to layout. The mix of housing type is not appropriate for local need, which is mainly for the smaller dwellings. The fourth point concerns scale. The scale of the development is not appropriate within the AONB. The development is too large in this context. The parish comment then moves on to talk about existing and new conditions. A. Drainage. The council is concerned about the drainage and sewerage and surface water management. They are not happy that existing plans will meet the conditions imposed. Ineffective drainage and sewage systems may result in flooding and damage in other parts of the village, and this is unacceptable. B. Construction and vehicle impact management statement. The council asks that before any development goes ahead, the developers provide a full and robust construction management statement, including how noise, pollution, vehicle movements and other matters will be managed and mitigated during the construction phase, and addresses how vehicle movements will be coordinated with contemporaneous developments. This should include a timetable of proposed activities and agreement to minimise effect on neighbours and traffic in the village. C. Climate emergency. The council asks that in line with Dorset Council's climate emergency statement, the plans are altered to include solar panels, ground air source heat pumps, or other types of carbon neutral design throughout. End. The council would like to draw the committee's attention to correspondence from Mr. Graham Cox, Dorset Council Tree Officer, to Mr. Bird on the 11th of February 2020. This followed a site meeting between Mr. Cox and members of the council. And this is a quote. My one significant reservation about the arboricultural report is the inclusion of a substantial amount of management work, including a great deal of felling. That's not directly related to the development. I note you're looking at a condition that would specifically exclude this work to trees in the TPZ, close brackets. The council agrees with Mr. Cox's view and asks that his comments be especially noted. Thank you. That's the end of the comments. I do apologise. I think I've missed the by swapping from Chelsea to me. I think I've swapped the Nigel Jarvis, the applicant's comments, and I do apologise that it means that they're in the wrong order, but I've just come across them. If it's okay with you, Chairman, I'll read them out last.
Yes, please.
Nigel Jarvis, the applicant. Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. I represent the applicant, Asta Holmes. I would like to begin by commending the report and thanking the officer for his consistent work assessing this application. I regret I cannot present this in person, but I am grateful you will consider my statement. Outline planning permission was allowed on appeal in March 2017, and the site was then sold. Fittingly for an affordable housing exception site, however, it was purchased by an affordable housing provider. Asta is a charity whose mission is to provide affordable housing and re-employs any profits back into meeting that goal. Turning to this application, Asta was aware the outline process had been controversial locally when submitting this reserve matters application, but did not fully anticipate the level and range of concerns. After the significant initial response, however, Asta chose to react positively. We carried out a full audit of the scheme, and significant improvements have been made to its layout, design quality, landscaping, and safety credentials. Underpinning this was a contextual analysis of development in Langton and Travers, a thorough review of local objections, discussions with key consultees, and an informal meeting with the parish council, all to ensure the revised scheme targeted local concerns so far as reasonably possible. Asta took considerable time and care to revamp the scheme and maximise its quality while ensuring it remains viable. Some objections to this application concern the principle. We recognise with sympathy the site will continue to be unpopular with some as a location for housing, but it has outline permission, and my client has purchased it with the goal of delivering affordable homes. The appeal inspector clearly acknowledged there would be some adverse impact to the AMB, but gave substantial weight to delivering affordable housing. A handful of market homes were permitted. They are necessary to make 80% affordable housing viable. Other reasons for objections concerns matters beyond the scope of reserve matters that will be dealt with in the later discharge of outline conditions. Relevant criticisms have been taken seriously. Concerns about road safety led to the addition of a footpath, 2 separate accesses for pedestrians, and improvements to the interface with Durnford Drove. Concerns about trees prompted a rethink of the woodland management goals set out by inherited outline stage reports. ASTA took fresh advice, changed the strategy, and dramatically reduced proposal for tree removal. These proposals will not cause any significant adverse effect. We therefore hope the committee endorse the recommendation and approve these reserve matters. The site is sustainable. This scheme will deliver a significant better development than was illustrated at the outline stage, and most importantly, affordable homes in Langton Matravers. Thank you. And that concludes the letters and comments to be read out, other than the one that Chelsea needs to read.
Thank you very much, everyone.
No, Chairman. Sorry, Chairman. I've found the original letter from John Coombs, and it is for a different application, so I think he's been put under the wrong item on the speakers list.
I was just going to raise that. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll come back to that one at the correct application. So we have had, where are we, 16 representations. Well done, everybody. It's quite a marathon, as I suggested. I will now move forward to the, before I do that, officers, are there any salient points from the representations that you wish to come back and highlight?
There's a fair number of comments from my point of view, Chair. I don't know if you really want me to go into a great deal of detail, but I do need to make 1 or 2 specific points, if I may, with regard in particular consultee responses.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, in relation to the tree officer comments, what the parish council, their comments, that their submission they quoted from the tree officer, but the latest representation we had from the tree officer was 16th of March 2020, and it is online, where he goes on to say, I am happy to support the revised approach as set out in the Arbour Eco report. That's the applicant's report. So as far as the tree officer is concerned, the scheme we have now is acceptable. It's worth also pointing out that at outline stage, the inspector, the indicative number of trees to be felled to allow the development to go ahead was 49. So the 37 that's now been worked out in detail on this application is actually less than that. And also in relation to a lot of the third-party comments about drainage and things like conflict with easements and so on. It's again also worth pointing out, if members may have already seen this, that in the Wessex Water submissions, they say in relation to a water main easement, for example, subject to application engineering agreement, it may be possible to divert the water main at the developer's expense. And it goes on to talk about, you know, the line of the waterway and being accurately marked and so on. So it's to me, it's clear from that comment that you know, it's not an absolute, you can't go ahead even with the easement. It means that even from the water management point of view, water company point of view, you know, it's not certain. Although, of course, as I've said previously, it's not a matter for consideration or determination as far as the planning application is concerned. There are a number of points that I could draw out as far as the inspector's comment is, the inspector's report is concerned, and some of the comments that have been made, most particularly again in relation to major development, and that's clearly addressed in the inspector's report, in particular paragraph 20. I think I've referred to that before about this not being major development within the terms of the MPPF, and that, as I said, it doesn't. The definition of major that's set out is for other legislative reasons in the administration of planning applications doesn't apply in this particular case. It's also worth me pointing out that as far as access arrangements are concerned, neither the National Trust nor Langton House raised any difficulties as far as access is concerned in response to the consultation on this planning application. Both those parties did raise objections in principle at outline planning application stage, but have put no submissions in respect of the detailed proposals. Also, Chair, climate emergency, parish council comment, where they require lots of renewable energy type features included in the development. Unfortunately, Chair, at reserve matters stage, you cannot apply those. They should have been, if they were going to be applied, at outline planning application stage, so they can be incorporated into the details. At that time, and indeed even now, there was no local plan policy that had sufficiently progressed to bring that to bring that sort of thing forward. So the inspector couldn't have applied it even if he wanted to, because it just wasn't a policy in existence. There's been comment made about second homes, again, because we've gone past the stage of setting out that the liability and so on about the planning application, at the outline planning application stage. The open market properties that are set out in the scheme are simply unrestricted open market properties, and again can't now go back and try and apply conditions at reserve matters stage about second homes. Again, should have been applied if it was appropriate at the outline application stage. And just make a comment on Mr. Mays had made reference to AONB landscape planning officers or other experts being present. Again, worth pointing out, members I'm sure have already seen that the landscape planning officer, the AONB landscape planning officer, has actually got no objections to this particular scheme, or didn't raise any objections. And rather the comments that have made in the pack that you've had are relation to comments from the earlier applications and not current planning applications. And as already outlined, there was a landscape visual impact assessment considered by the inspector as part of the appeal process, and it was prepared in accordance with the recognised guidance and methodology, which is the Mr. Mays said is the guidance for landscape visual impact assessment. It's actually prepared by the Landscape Institute and the Institute of Environmental Management, if my memory serves me correct. It is a recognised document, but it's not actually a national government one, as was implied. I think, Chair, that's sufficient as far as I need to explain at this moment in time.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Tony. Right, I'm now going to move on to the member debate, and currently I have two speakers. The first one is David Took.
Thank you, Chair. I emailed you the other day with an issue which Tony sort of addressed in his presentation, but basically the planning inspector imposed conditions on his approval, and condition one of those reads: details of the access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale, hereinafter called the reserved matters, shall be submitted to and approved in writing, etc. And my concern is that almost all of the issues in the condition are not addressed in any detail in this application. And the officer's report seems to agree with that, because they note that they put up conditions 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, which relate to each of those things. And basically what they say in those conditions are that they'll discuss them in more detail with the applicant. But these items are the nub of the reserved matters referred to in that condition, and the details provided for this committee to examine in relation to the reserved matters are, in my view, skimpy and inadequate. We're told that these will be dealt with by the officers, not this committee, but it's this committee which is being asked to approve them or not. I saw Tony's remarks relating to this during his presentation and the applicant's later comments, but I was not reassured, especially in light of some of the comments we've just had read out. Surely we should have full details of the excuse me. Surely we should have full details of these reserved matters before we can approve them. And I would propose that until these matters are presented with all relevant detail, that the reserved matters application be rejected, and that the applicant would therefore need to be resubmitted with these details included. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Before I move on to the next speaker, I think I need a response from the planners, please.
Members, if I can come back on a couple of the conditions. The supplemental conditions that you've got in on this reserved matters application about the details of the foul water and other matters. The inspector's position on that was very clear. Condition 4 and 5 of the appeal inspector's decision letter only requires that information to be submitted in detail before any groundworks start. And that's condition 4, which talks about surface water, condition 5 for foul water drainage disposal. So the officer recommendation and the opposition to that condition is making it clear about the scope of what that information should include. But going back to what the inspector said, again, in granting the outline permission, that information is not required until groundwork start. I'll let Tony come back on the other points.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Tim. Yes, just to clarify, condition 3 is actually, as I said, it's a belt and braces. It's making sure that there's no misunderstanding about information shown on the drawings as part of this application. There's no misunderstanding that they could be considered or even implied as being approved drainage details, because they're not. But going through conditions again in terms of detail, if you look at condition 2, as I said, what it actually does is defines quite clearly, utilising. If you recollect, I showed the plan with a very complex plan with all the trees and numbers and all the details on, and it sets out very clearly only the trees, the 37 of them, that can be removed as far as the development is concerned. Nothing else. I mean, to my mind, that's a very clear condition that is not requiring further details. It's expressly saying this is all that you can do. And if we go to condition 7, again, if you look at the wording of it, it talks about the manufacturer's name, product name and colour of all external facing and roofing materials, surfacing materials, footpaths, etc. Again, that's a very clear condition in the sense that it's not requiring something that wasn't put in. All it's requiring is being clear and clarifying exactly what those details are. Obviously, we could see from the drawings and the other information that's been submitted that we know what the type of wall is going to be, the buildings, we know what type of roofing is going to be, and we know the nature of the driveways and parking areas, etc., etc. We just require express details. So again, that's not information that's missing as far as the application is concerned. The only condition that requires something which is, if you like, in some way additional to the application, is the fact that we are in practice excluding the details of walls and fences and ground levels that's shown on the drawings. Again, it's not that they're not been submitted; they are submitted. But what we're saying is that, for the reasons I explained, that these could be and should be dealt with in more detail for the reasons that I've said. I mean, fundamentally, that's not something that in the overall scheme of the development, it's going to radically change the nature of the scheme. So they're not that significant in that sense. They are important details, but they're not so significant to get to the heart of any of the reserved matters as such. So I mean, I do understand the point that the council was making, that in an ideal world, and this is common with, certainly from the local residents' point of view, not just about the reserved matters, but about every aspect of the development. In an ideal world, I'd like to see it all together and all wrapped up and presented in one go. But that's not the way the system works. And the way we're dealing with this is pretty standard in many respects as far as the planning system is concerned. It's nothing unusual. What's very important as far as I think the local community is concerned is to emphasise that the authority, and it's not just officers, it's the authority. So these conditions are conditions dealt with by the authority, not just individual officers in that sense. But we're readily able to properly coordinate and make sure that that aspect A of a scheme is properly lined up with aspect B of the scheme. That's what we do all the time. So there are no issues from our point of view about any conflicts arising from these details and what's been presented in the planning application. Chair, thank you.
Kim Cowell, Chair, if I may just come back on one small point. Condition 7, the materials and samples. On a site as sensitive as this, even though we know what the materials are specified to be, we would always ask to see them on site because and it's commonplace and it's common practice for officers to see samples of materials in situ so they can make that final decision.
Thank you very much, Kim and Tony. Dave, you wanted to come back?
Thank you. Yes, Chair. I hear what Kim's saying. I deliberately didn't relate to the inspector's conditions 4 and 5. I referred simply to condition 1 and the fact that the inspector is talking about details. And the devil, as we all know, the devil is always in the detail. And I'm still of the opinion that the level of detail provided is insufficient and inadequate. And I don't see how this committee can actually go forward and approve something with the lack of detail that we've had presented to us. Hence the proposal that I said that we actually reject this and suggest that they come back with more detail. Thank you.
Can I request, Chair, if Councillor could be more specific about what actual aspect of detail he thinks is missing?
Well, I went through those initially in terms of all of the things, the details missing from that you have found necessary to create conditions to get information about. So you've created conditions 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 because, and I can only assume it's because there is insufficient detail before you at the moment. You need more in order for these conditions to be fulfilled. Well, as a committee, this is just the sort of detail that we need to be looking at in order to meet the inspector's requirement that the reserved matters are dealt with in detail.
Chair, if I may comment, I mean, again, if we go through those conditions in terms of detail, the drawings do show surface water drainage detail. We're excluding them because of the condition. That's number 3. Number 4, the drawings do show boundary walls, fencing and so on. What we're saying is that, as part of the overall detail, we're excluding those and we're requiring some more information. Condition 5 is, again, we have the landscape strategy. I'm not quite sure if Councillor is saying that landscape strategy is inadequate in some way. If the Councillor is saying that he actually wants to see full details of tree and shrub planting before he feels he can make a decision, then I'm not quite sure the wording of the condition is an impediment in that respect, because quite clearly it requires submissions to be made. I'm not quite sure if there's any particular detail of tree and shrub planting that the councillor wants to be convinced about that can't be dealt with by condition. I mean, again, it's worth emphasising that one of the purposes of conditions is to ensure that, if you're thinking that something should be refused, then you are required to consider whether a planning condition can properly mitigate and deal with that reason for refusal. So if you're saying that you think there's not enough information about tree planting and so on, then that condition it expressly does it for you. As an example.
What I'm saying is that in your report, you say in condition 3, despite the information submitted, this approval does not relate to any details of surface water drainage, foul water drainage, water supply or other utilities. Condition 4, despite the information submitted with the application before any of the above groundworks take place. Condition 5, despite the information submitted with the application. Condition 6, before any groundworks takes place, a maintenance schedule and management plan is required. Condition 7, manufacturer's name, product name and colour. Now, all of these things are detail that are clearly relevant, otherwise you wouldn't be asking for them, but we are being asked to take as read that the conditions are going to satisfy the need for this. And I'm not convinced.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt at this point because I've allowed a little bit of free debate between you and the planning officer. However,
thank you, Chair. Yes,
a lot of the standard planning conditions do delegate to the professionals the minutiae and the detail. Our job is about the principles. I'm now going to move on to the next speaker, which is Alex Brenton.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My concern is that, following on from Councillor Took, that we as a planning committee will be held responsible for accepting conditions for which we are not necessarily fully conversant, and that this application has been going on for some time. You know, it's in various iterations, and the world has changed in the last 2 or 3 years, and we are talking about housing for affordable housing, which should be for 20 years assumed, and we are working on plans or ideas from about probably 10 years ago. We should be looking at these houses expecting to have recommendations that are much stronger on sustainable features of the housing. Some of these houses are going to be considerably shaded by the mature trees, so therefore they will not be able to take advantage of natural sunlight. They will not be able to be pleasant places to live if their back gardens are continually shaded. Those sort of issues have not been discussed on this, and I'm sure you'll say, oh, but we can only discuss what is in front of us. But it is our reputation on the line for the next 20 years if we allow through properties which will be difficult, unpleasant and totally uneconomic to live in. There doesn't appear to be anything insisting on water butts, water storage, keeping water on site, where it's all about letting the water, you know, into a drainage system, not actually about reusing it. There's nothing there about solar panels, or why is there nothing about ground source cables and pumps before building takes place. We have got none of those regulations in, and you could say, well, they weren't in the planning application, but we will be responsible in 20 years' time when people say, well, why did they let that one go through? I agree with the principle of building on this little site because I think it would be quite a pleasant site. I do think it's over busy. And I would like to see this palette of materials that we discuss. I would like to actually have a bit more information about that. There's a couple of issues in there. There's a report from the Fire Authority about, and that is all about being able to access the site with fire engines, which is an issue in Durford Drove. So it's that sort of access I worry about. There's also some of these single bed places have one way in. And when you're talking about upstairs buildings and you have one narrow staircase up and no other way out, that seems a bad bit of planning. We also have in units 3 and 4, we've got a downstairs toilet in the kitchen. I mean, I thought we stopped doing that donkeys years ago. So I query the quality of the build. So I've got several issues that I'm worried about, particularly the reuse of grey water and the quality of the build.
Thank you, Alex. The one thing I will say is that to have all of the eco suggestions that you've made is we need to have a policy base, and we don't have that yet. As far as the other points, do any of the officers want to come back on those?
Thank you, Joe. I was going to make the very point you've just said, but equally, Chair, if again thinking of planning conditions, if members feel that the planning condition is justified and meets all the necessary tests, I don't think that is the case, but you must consider that before you go to a refusal on the sustainable features ground. As far as materials and information is concerned, I mean, as I said, we have got information about materials. I think the palette is set out in the report, if my memory serves me correctly, and all the individual drawings show, you know, and express details and so on. And there, and again, I mentioned some of those. And as far as the matters like fire access and the access within the buildings are concerned, obviously, you know, modern construction, they have to meet modern building regulations, and matters of that type ordinarily aren't a matter for determination of planning applications. I don't know if the highway engineer would wish to comment about the fire access provision, but I would make the general comment that as part of the, again, planning application information, there have been tracking plans shown that how the site can be accessed by HGVs, or in particular refuse vehicles and as well as fire and emergency vehicles. And we have confirmation from the Dorset Waste Partnership that they will access the site. So in terms of that sort of level of access, the application meets the current requirements. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. The highways officer has lost his connection, so we're not able to get a response from him at the moment.
Okay.
Alex, did you wish to come back on what's been said? Can you unmute your microphone, please?
Can you hear me? No.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I understand this business about having. I agree with the palette as in the type of slate, the type of brick and render. That is fine. What worries me is that we are not encouraging a better layout, a better design of these buildings. And I wondered how many times we've actually asked them to improve the floor plans, improve the access, because we are talking about a fairly, very controversial site in terms of the village. And by having a very basic setup, you can imagine that it will not be very long before conservatories and sheds and other domesticated clutter go up in these pretty small gardens. And we also have a thing of saying no external lights. How is that going to be controlled? Surely people will just put on their own action initiated outside lights. How are we going to police this? How are we going to control this? This is going to be a very strange little enclave of houses, quite tight, quite domesticated in a very natural setting. If we had thought about the green issues to start with, perhaps we would end up with a better result. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to the next speaker, which is Beryl Ezard. I have two more after that.
Thank you, Chairman. I take on board Councillor Took and Brenton's comments. And although Councillor Took says about rejecting this, I would be more of a mind to defer it. And that would be really on some of these grounds that we haven't got enough details, but a couple of things that haven't been mentioned yet, and that is about the scale, not scale perhaps, but the appearance of the buildings, because the density we can't do anything about, although it may be that it's nearly twice as much as is the housing in Gypsys. But I do mention that actually the actual buildings themselves are like the apartments or flats. There is no actual flats in Langton Travers, not custom built flats anyway, and certainly the semi-detached and the terrace housing that is put in here is not a regular feature in the village, and I think this is going to spoil the actual village in having these lots of semi-detached and terrace housing and a set of flats. I think that's unacceptable, and I do actually think that should be addressed so that the layout and the appearance is less actually muddled and cluttered. Semi-detached may be acceptable, but certainly not blocks of apartments or flats, as you call them, and then a terrace of housing on this lovely exceptional site. I mean, I'm quite happy that actually there is 28 on this site, but I think there'll be better use of the site to accommodate them. And I think that actually, apart from, I'm really upset about the access and about it impacting on the local Durnford roads and Durnford Drove and the access up to the National Trust areas. I really do think that the actual appearance of the buildings, and which it says appearance means this relates to the aspects that which determine the visual impression a building or place makes, including building form and architecture. Well, I'm afraid that I do not agree, and I think this needs some attention, and that is under the reserved matters. So I would like that to go back to the developer and say, look, can we only have detached or semi-detached houses, please? Thank you.
As I've said before, Councillor Ezard, we can only determine the application in front of us, not what we would like to see.
Yeah, but the thing is the appearance is a reserved matter. I thought that would say it is exactly what I'm saying now, and it's in the planners actually papers on page 17. It says the various things that were taken into account is access, layout, scale, appearance, and I've just read what the appearance means. So I would have thought that includes what I've just said about the actual visual impression of the buildings. It does not fit in with the local village scene. So I would say that sets a precedent for the future. And as the other councillors are saying, we are putting our lives on the line here. This is a very emotive planning application, even though it might be reserved matters. And I've taken a lot of time to go through a lot of the stuff. And I do believe that some of these things do count, and it should be taken into account by when we determine this. We can't just be fobbed off with the fact, oh well, that's delegated to the planners, or oh well, the final details are going to be discussed later on. But I'm talking about appearance here, and I do think the appearance of a block of flats, as I see it, or a terrace of houses, just does not fit in with the local scene, and I think that needs addressing. And I'm sorry, but that is it. And also I believe that some sort of mitigation with the climate change should be put in there as well, because we've got to keep up to date with this thing. And it may be that the planning application was put in some time ago, but we are actually considering it today. So whether and the full planning application will come out later on. So some of the policy may change. So if we could put something in to say that we are minded to actually think that climate change should be added in, even if it isn't a policy, then that would actually be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. All I will do is reiterate, we do not have a policy base for climate change at the moment, so therefore we cannot force an applicant to add that to an application as a condition. Kim, can I come back to you, please, on some of the other points that Councillor Ezard has raised?
Yeah. Yes, in terms of the design and layout, I was going to ask Tony if you could put up the layout plan that was before the inspector. It was illustrative, but it did give some indication of how the dwellings would be distributed across the site. And that was the starting point, because clearly the inspector had regard to the illustrative, whilst it was an outline, the inspector did have regard to the illustrative layout, and he makes reference to that. You can see that as part of that illustrative layout, semi-detached properties were indicated, albeit illustrative, but there was an expectation that that's what would come forward. Had the inspector at that point considered them completely inappropriate for the site, he had it within his gift to influence the scheme that followed on. That's what the illustrative layout proposed, and in your office's opinion, what's now been delivered in layout terms is an improvement. If we can go back to, if we can compare the two slides. And your officers have worked with the landscaping team and the O&B office and others through consultation to try and deliver a scheme which is better suited to the site and which has qualities that will be consistent with the location in which they sit. That goes down to the materials, etc. And we've covered that point when we talked about the conditions earlier, that they've specified slate and other materials that are appropriate in this location, but your officers want to ensure that the details are submitted for final approval. Thank you.
Can I come back?
Yes, Mary.
Chairman, it's just it wasn't the appearance from that point of view. It was actually the density of the groups of buildings. There is no custom built flats in the village. There is no terrace of houses in the village except very old stone ones. So any new build, I would wish to see that you've got Gypsay's Estate in the Hyde, and even down Durnford Grove have got only one or two semi-detached houses, no terraces, and certainly no blocks of flats. So why is it that they've introduced a block of flats and a terrace when there is nothing like that near it in the village? Thank you.
May I comment there, Chair?
Of course.
This is the block of flats as they're described. I mean, in terms of appearance, first of all, in terms of scale, as I've said, you're looking at the overall dimensions of these buildings. If you think as an individual scale, these buildings are in some way unacceptable in that location, then, and you feel you could justify that on appeal, then that could represent a reason why you would turn down the planning application. Similarly, if you felt as individual compositions, these buildings, the appearance in some way was unacceptable in relation to context, then again that could form a justifiable reason for refusal. But I have to say, you're going to be very hard pushed as to I mean, if you look at these this block of flats, to most people, they wouldn't even read them as a block of flats. And there's nothing inherently deficient about them. And there are larger scale buildings in Langton. Langton House, as an example, is considerably larger scale building than this one. And there are lots of other larger scale buildings in the village itself, irrespective of whether they're single dwellings, terrace dwellings, or any other form of occupancy. This building, however you look at it, is not large. Its appearance it's a well-designed composition, properly broken up. It's not unacceptable or out of place in context. Similarly, the only terrace building we're talking about is the single block of 4 units. And again, the scale, overall scale of proportions are fine. Appearance, and again, as Councillor Izzard correctly said, that's the detail here. The form, the shape of the building, and the way the doors, windows, and materials and so on are all formed. There's nothing inherently wrong about those, and I take a contrary view to Councillor Izzard about what's elsewhere in Langton and Travers, which of course, as planning officers dealt with that patch for a long time. I'm pretty familiar with what's around, and these buildings are not inappropriate in the wider context of Langton and Travers. Yes, in the context of
members, if you would assist, and thank you, Tony. Kim Cowell here again. I've got the inspector's letter, looked at the layout again, and he made a couple of points that may assist members' deliberation. And this talks about the form and the grouping of the dwellings as you see them. The proposed development would have a relatively high density compared generally to the nearby existing village properties, particularly those in gypsies backing onto the footpath running along the northern site boundary. Those properties have a particularly long and mature rear gardens. However, from vantage points on footpaths to the east and southeast of the site, it would also be seen to some extent in the context of the much more clearly visible dwellings of the High to the northeast of the site. Those dwellings are generally located fairly close together, lining the road up to the edge of the open countryside. The illustrative site layout also shows how the proposed buildings would be set away from the eastern boundary, together with a high degree of softening or screening from the trees surrounding the site, even in winter months with the leaves off. The proposal would be unlikely to have a dominating effect on that existing open setting south of the settlement when viewed from those vantage points. And that was the other scheme that was illustrated before the inspector. But I just wanted to raise that because he was talking about the context of the site and its visual impact from beyond the site itself. Your officer's view is that the proposal is an improvement on the illustrative scheme that was before the inspector, and as Tony has mentioned, the flats are designed to look like rural dwellings, and is considered acceptable subject to the conditions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to move on to the next speaker, Shane Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously, I have some sympathy with those members that aren't happy about some of the details of their matters. However, I am of a view that the officers are the professionals in this field, and it's normal practice for those details to be dealt with by the officers. And I'm sure if the officers had any further concerns, it would be brought back to the members. So in terms of I don't wish to micromanage the process in terms of the applications in front of us. I'm happy that it does fulfil the NPPF policy. It is a sustainable development, and the development will deliver desperately needed affordable housing. And I think Purbeck, like many areas in the county, suffers tremendously with affordable housing, social housing, in order for us to keep young families in the county. We've had this time and time again about the ability to keep young families within the county, and we know from the figures that we actually leach young families and children out of this county at a frightening rate. And I was very pleased to see the size of these houses and the bedrooms and the capacity of these houses to allow young families to stay in the area. And I think enabling families and children to stay in the area, obviously that as the demographic of the local area, I think that's very important. And also it goes towards making our schools viable in that area. And Purbeck does have a significant problem about keeping families within that area. So in terms of the site itself and the layout of it, I'm happy with that. It's obviously constrained due to the fact of the significant amount of trees that are on the curtilage of the area, and being unable to encroach into the root bases of those trees. Of course, the benefit of that curtilage having such a high density of trees around it means that it will help to reduce any harm that there would be into the local area in terms of seeing that development in that particular position, and I think that's important. I think it will soften that development, and it will enable it to blend into the environment around it. I don't think there's any objection from the highways, so I'm happy with that. And I don't think there's any dimensional harm to the immediate residential area. As I say, I think due to the way it will be screened by the trees, I think it won't have a significant impact on its neighbouring community in regards to its visual presence. Also, the 37 trees that can be removed, obviously the applicant came back, originally requested to remove some 100 trees. And they've obviously had a look at that and had a rethink about it, so that's good from a sustainable part of it. And the development, I think, does make best use of the land. And I think on the basis of that, Madam Chairman, with the debate that I've heard so far, with the officer's report, and I must commend the officer on the report that he gave, I'm happy to propose that we go with the recommendation and grant approval of the reserved matters with the conditions as laid out in the officer's report, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Shane. Cherry Brooks, you're the next speaker. Do you wish to second the proposal?
Sorry, no, I don't. I've got some questions that I need answering before I can make a decision on that.
That's fine.
Has Shane finished now, and me?
Yeah, it's on to you now.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm the ward member for this area, and I've had a lot of discussions with people, some of whom are very against the development and some of whom are pro the development. And I've been over the documentation and the drawings on our website. I've visited the site, and I've noted also that the school has put in a request for approval because they need the numbers of families coming into the village. Also, the post office and the local shop is just in the process of closing down. So, and that's because there probably weren't enough people in the village being able to use it. So I've actually got 8 questions from going through all the documentation, and if I can just go through those and have them answered, then I'll be in a better position. One of the objections was that the properties, the bedrooms, in particular, did not meet the national minimum build standards. Can I have confirmation that all of the properties do meet the national standards, please? The second question is that the AONB commented that ridge heights were too high for the canopies of the trees, and has that been addressed? The third question, condition 10, which is about surface water runoff not going onto the highway. Could we possibly add "and nearby residential properties", because that then makes the developer more liable, and there's less room for argument over that. Number 4, we did a site visit around Purbeck of some of the developments that we had approved, and what we did find on one particular really nice development was it'd been really windy and they hadn't thought to put bin stores in for the flats. I didn't see any bin stores. Is that something that we could condition just for the flats? On question 5, slide 24, there is something that says about taking out trees for the site compound. Could we put a condition in that says they must replant once the compound has been taken down and the development finished, that they would replace those trees? Slide 6, one of the comments from slide 7 it was, question 6. One of the comments from one of the objectors was that the bridleway or the footpath that's going along the north side of the development narrows to 1 metre, and yeah, it does. That's that line there. I thought it was a bridleway, so can it do that, or is that already included in the approval? I'm nearly there. 7. Renewable energy. Some members had asked whether it could be put on as a condition, and I know that you said that we needed a policy, but we do have the emerging Purbeck local plan policies on that, and renewable energy was included in the Purbeck local plan. So could that be looked at, please? And the last thing is that another objection was that the lighting, or the lack of lighting, is not suitable. Although it's suitable for dark skies policy, they didn't feel that it was appropriate for this development. I'm wondering, because there are areas, other areas of Purbeck which have dark skies, and they have specific lighting that that sort of downlights and doesn't make too much of an impact. And has that been considered? Could that be put on as a condition? And that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, there's quite a list there. Tony, do you want to come in first and then perhaps Kim afterwards?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, I think I probably missed one of the questions there. Bedroom sizes, first of all. The application, the documents submitted with the application confirmed that the sizes of the accommodation would meet the standards appropriate for affordable housing. It's not quite the national standards, it's some other national guidance, and I forget what it is off the top of my head, but it is required to be affordable housing to meet the required national standards, to meet the affordable housing national standards. As far as the open market housing is concerned, yes, they're sufficiently large enough to meet the national standards. The AOMB comment about tree canopy and proximity of ridge heights and so on. One of the issues about obviously building houses in close proximity to trees is always the question about whether you're creating problems at the future of people who occupy those properties to want trees removed because they're getting, you know, bird poo on their washing lines and all that sort of stuff. It's a difficult one because there's a balance here between you know, making sure that the development fits as far as the environment is concerned, as well as the amenity of the neighbouring or the occupiers. The tree officer is certainly satisfied that you know that's comfortable. Of course, the tree officer deals all the time with dwellings in close proximity to housing. So I think the answer is, yeah, there may well be long-term, potentially some of the occupiers will not be quite as comfortable living amongst trees as some of the other occupiers, but the tree officer is satisfied that that's not an impediment to the grant of planning permission. Drainage on highway, that's one of the Colin Graham's recommended conditions. It's a fairly standard condition, and I don't think, perhaps Philip would comment, but I don't think it's possible to extend that onto neighbouring, to cover neighbouring land, bearing in mind in this instance full control over the surface water management of the site is being dealt with via the condition on the appeal. So, you know, and I can perhaps give you some assurance that I know from the way the LFFA have approached this site that they are going to be really looking at this in detail, and will really need to be, you know, well satisfied that everything about the surface water management scheme works to the best as possible. And again, one of the sort of like design criteria for that's almost certainly going to be the 1 to 100 year event plus a percentage for climate change, which is in the region now of 30%. So it's a significant issue that has yet to be addressed, but rather than put it in by that condition, which I don't think is reasonable, it certainly will be controlled as part of the already existing condition on the outline planning permission. In terms of bin stores, yeah, it's a fair comment actually, because I think bin stores have been shown on some of the drawings earlier on, and I think possibly in some instances they've been omitted as far as the later drawings concerned. So a condition as far as the bin stores for flats are concerned is not unreasonable, because as I'm sure Councillor Brooks is implying, bin stores for flats are likely to be a bit bigger than the, you know, they're the Euro bin size rather than the single bin size. So yeah, a condition on that is perfectly possible. As far as the question about footpaths are concerned, if I can go to my PowerPoint. first of all explain that these are public footpaths. They are not public rights of way. And in terms of the site boundary, the application site boundary, this is the application site boundary. And yes, the footpath is wider here than it is down here. And you may have sort of picked that up from the photographs, I think, when we were looking at the width of the footpath. It's wider here, which is at the sort of, towards the end of the start of the site. And when we go down to the other end, and it gets a little bit narrower, this is the hide end and so on. So as a matter of fact, that footpath is narrower down this end of the application site than it is at the other end. But that's, again, to be clear, it's outside the scope of the application. It's a footpath, not a bridle way, and the Footpaths and Rights of Way officer has not raised any objections to this development. Question 6. I can't remember what that was. Sorry, perhaps Councillor Brooks could remind me.
That was the bridle way, question 6.
Oh, yeah. Was it? Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
I think it might be the one about replanting of trees.
That was 5, yeah, replacing the trees after the compound is removed.
Oh, sorry, yes, sorry, I've obviously confused myself here. I'll just go back then to the plan that we're talking about. Yeah, this is where the compound is going to be. And yes, it would be possible as part of the replanting scheme to insist that that's concentration, that this grouping that runs all along the site boundary here, only the bit at this end of that is going to be removed to facilitate the construction of that access. The majority of this planting in here is not high grade planting, but it's being removed because the access sort of swings in here and goes across there. So I'll change to the preferred pen. Laser pointer. So these trees here can be replaced as part of the requirement of the condition that we've imposed if members felt that was a specific area. I have to admit, although we were considering about planting here, my concentration of the planting would be almost certainly sort of more down this end of the site and and around the sort of the other periphery rather than that little bit there. But yes, it's perfectly possible to make that something specific as far as the replanting is concerned if members felt that was justified. And then the other point was renewable energy and sustainable construction and so on. Again, that's the sort of thing that should have been imposed at outline planning application stage, because it obviously gets to the heart of the nature of the development here. There wasn't any local plan policy at the time that could be applied, and even with the emerging local plan now, bearing in mind that this is not back at principle stage, it's about those specific details of scale, appearance, landscaping, etc. It wouldn't be reasonable or even justifiable, in my opinion, given where we are, to seek to apply renewable energy requirements in any shape or form to the buildings, as disappointing as that is. But you must remember that renewable energy is only one element of sustainable development, and the inspector in the appeal decision addressed sustainable location for development in deciding that this was acceptable or not. And the final point, I think, is the residential amenity in relation to
lighting in the dark sky.
Yes, it's interesting that, because that's a good question, I have to say, because in fairness,
Tony, I'm going to have to ask you to speed up because we're almost at 1 o'clock and I need to do a member vote.
Okay, yes, to be very quick about it, I did have a discussion with the applicant about the wording of that particular condition, and although it's not intended to introduce street lamps or other significant external lighting as part of the overall scheme, there is the potential that, as you say, occupiers may want, a light to the porch or something like that. The purpose of the condition is to require that to be submitted to approval, but if you were anxious about that, it would be possible to amend that wording to say, details of any lighting should be submitted to approved in writing, which is the practical effect of that condition, but not the actual wording that members of the public might readily understand. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's 2 minutes to 1 o'clock. Members, Constitution says that we cannot discuss things for more than 3 hours. We have 2 minutes to go. Do members want to stop at 1 o'clock and resume at 2, or do members wish to finish this application, but we will still have to resume the meeting at 2 o'clock because of the public? Can I have a proposal, please?
Madam Chairman, Vice Chairman, could I propose that we continue this to conclusion and then take the break?
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
David Took, seconded.
You're on, okay. What's happening?
Shane, you've proposed the motion. Are you in favour to continue?
I am, Madam Chairman.
Alex Brenton?
In favour.
Cherry Brooks?
Sorry, in favour.
Robin Cook?
In favour.
Mike Dyer?
In favour.
Beryl Lezard? Beryl, are you in favour of continuing?
Yeah, sorry, no, against.
Okay. Barry Gorringe?
In favour.
David Morgan?
In favour.
David Took, seconded. Are you in favour?
In favour of continuing, yes.
Thank you. And John Worth?
In favour, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So 1 against, all the rest in favour. The motion is carried. We will continue to finish this application before we break for lunch. Thank you very much, members. Cherry, did you wish to come back on any of the points that the planning officer has made?
The only point that I have a bit of difficulty is that we can't apparently impose conditions for things like the renewable energy or the second homes policy, because if that wasn't done at outline planning permission stage when it was given by the inspector. And I'd just like to double check maybe with Philip whether that is the case, please. Other than that, I'm happy with all the other answers.
Okay, just before I bring Philip back in, I'm just going to confirm that at the officer's suggestion and in light of your comments that we have an additional condition about bin stores. And we also have an amendment to the lighting condition. So while we are talking, perhaps we can have some appropriate wording for those. Phil Crowther, you wanted to come in, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just one point before I turn to Councillor Brooks's comments, and just to pick up something that Tony said. It's a very small point, but one just so members are clear that a public footpath is a public right of way. It's a type of public right of way. Turning now to Councillor Brooks's questions, conditions can only be imposed if they meet the policy tests set out in the either in the NPPF or the planning practice guidance, which are that they're relevant, necessary, enforceable, proportionate, and deal with planning matters. I think I would absolutely agree that the second homes policy is a matter that is an in principle matter rather than a reserved matters application, and so my view would be that it wouldn't be reasonable to impose it at this stage. My view would be again on renewable energy that it would probably be unreasonable at this stage to impose such a condition, but there's but really, and I don't have the information before me, much of that would depend on the weight that can be attached to emerging policies and exactly what they say in the emerging Purbeck local plan, and the extent to which those policies have any objections, or that or that those objections have been dealt with by the inspector. So in summary, I think it's probably unreasonable to impose those kind of conditions at this stage. That said, if members felt so strongly that they wish to impose them and had good reasons for doing so, because we have to give reasons for conditions, it is a matter that the applicant could later seek to apply to alter those conditions if they felt that they were that unreasonable. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Does that answer all your questions, Cherry? Okay, I'm now going to move on
Sorry,
to...
no, I've got it. My toolbar had disappeared. Sorry. I am concerned particularly about the second homes policy because it's high on the agenda of the residents of Langton. There are a lot of second homes, and the increase from the original discussed 2 houses to now 6 of the 22. If they were, if they were to be second homes, I think that would have an impact on the village.
Okay, Kim, can you give us some advice on that, please?
The site, the policy is applicable to the site, but as Phil has said, clearly at this juncture, it's very difficult for us to put on something that goes back to the principle. But just to give members some sort of comfort, I guess, the affordable homes are already restricted to local people. So and they take it's only the open market housing that wouldn't be covered, and because they're the greater part of the site, clearly the greater number of houses, the majority would be restricted without the need for a policy.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on now, and my next speaker is Robin Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. Most of the questions I had have been answered, but I wanted to pick up on really what Shane was talking about. By the way, is this all right? Because I think I touched one of the wrong things on the toolbar. Is this working okay for you? Yes?
Yes, fine. Can see and hear you.
Yeah, fine. It is this question of conditions. I think I understand the feeling amongst members about the conditions that are applied, and we can't micromanage these. I'm sorry, much as we'd love to, but the one thing I would say is I do sympathise with those that have said about the overall finishing of the buildings, because at one time we used to have something at East Dorset called the Architects Panel, when we'd look at development, very often bigger than this, but we'd look at it together with the architects in advance of a meeting and have a look at the suggested finishes, which is always quite helpful towards making a decision going forward. And to some extent, I think that might be helpful for the future. However, I don't think we could micromanage. I understand a lot of the other concerns, but it seems to me a great deal of what I've heard today, and this very, very lengthy report and very, very good report, is subjective and what people would like to see or what might happen. And I'm inclined perhaps to agree with some of that. But we are, as has been said, here to determine what's in front of us. The one question I have got, and I think what the answer is going to be, is around this access, because we seem to have glossed over very quickly at the beginning of the report about taking on land which is not within our ownership, or it's approved on the outline, agreed, but I'm wondering whether this will come back and bite us later on. So can I have a little bit more clarification on that, please? Thank you.
Tony, do you want to respond to that?
Certainly, Chair. Sorry, I've only got one screen, so I have to flick between images, and it's not quite as straightforward as one would hope. But just going back to the appeal application, this is the red line, as I've said, of the appeal, and this is the land within which.
Tony, we've lost your presentation. I can see a lovely picture of your children, which is being broadcast to the world.
Oh dear, right, okay. No, that's not mine, sorry. Yeah. Do it again. Is that better?
Thank you.
Still, yeah. Just again to repeat, that's the red line of the application site, because that's the land that was subject to the outline planning permission. And if there are conflicts within that, and as I've said before, that's disputed by the by the applicant, then that's, first of all, it's not a matter for the planning authority to get involved with anyway. And more importantly, the key consideration about any work that's subject to the reserve matters application is that it must be within the lines that are laid down there. If it was outside of that line, then we'd be saying you can't not comply with your the site of your outline planning permission. But in this case, that's the area of land that's subject to the seeming dispute, and therefore, even if you know the neighbouring claim is correct, that land does belong to him and it's not going to be form part of the access, as I think I've said, the applicant would have to come back to us and seek to change. And it's effectively this scheme, that element of the scheme. He couldn't implement the planning permission in accordance with that if that is in fact correct. And obviously then that would kick off the whole process of reconsultation, etc., etc. So, as I said, it's not an impediment to the planning application. It's clearly an important issue at the end of the day, and I've no doubt that the applicant now is aware of the submissions that have been made. Will be endeavouring to deal with that as quickly as they possibly can and make contact as appropriate. In fairness, earlier on in the processing of the application, earlier this year I should say, the owner of the property did raise an issue that I circulated or passed on to the applicant, and I had hoped that it might have been resolved because I've not heard any more until the submissions that have come in to members. So the bottom line is that as far as the reserve matter application is concerned, the development is within the land set out in the outline planning permission, and that is all that members really need to be satisfied in.
Okay, thank you very much. Robin, was there anything else you needed to say?
No, I'm happy with that, Chairman. That's the answer I expected, but I wanted to flag that issue up. Thank you.
Okay, are you going to second the proposal?
No, not at this stage, no.
Okay, thank you. My last speaker is John Worth. Can you turn your mic on, John?
Yeah, got there, yes. Having listened to the officers' reports and all the information that's been coming across, looking at the conditions that are being imposed, I'm minded to support Councillor Bartlett's proposal to approve this for planning permission. I think we've heard in great detail about the situation with this, but I think that it's already got the outline permission approved. We're just looking at the reserve matters, and I think we talked at length about those reserve matters, and I have every confidence in the officer going forward that the conditions will be imposed. So I am happy to second this proposal for approval.
Thank you. Does that include the revised conditions of bin stores and the wording on the lighting condition?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no other speakers, so I'm now going to put it to the vote, bearing in mind the time. So I will now do a roll call. Those in favour of grant with the 2 amended conditions. So I'm going to start with Shane Bartlett.
Madam Chairman, I'm happy to grant those 2 additional conditions being imposed as well. So happy to grant.
Thank you. Alex Brenton.
Against on this application.
Cherry Brooks.
Approve.
Robin Cook.
Approve.
Mike Dyer,
Approve.
Beryl Lazard,
Against.
Barry Gorringe,
Approve.
David Morgan,
Approve.
David Took,
Against.
John Worth.
Approve.
Okay. So the motion is carried by my reckoning 7 votes to 3. Can I have confirmation from David Northover, please?
I confirm, Chairman, it is approved by 7 votes to 3.
Thank you all very much. You've all earned a lunch break. We've been going for 3¼ hours. We have given this a lot of deliberation, and I want to thank everyone involved in this first application.
Thank you, Chair.
And members, I'll see you back just before 2 o'clock, and we go live at 2 o'clock on the dot. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Chairman, it's Phil Crowther. Is it worth mentioning about the other application that was on the agenda for this morning?
Of course. That will obviously have to be the first application that we consider this afternoon. And can someone please contact those that would be involved in that so that they're aware?